Yes.
City jackets?
I like your jacket.
Yeah.
Yeah. I got one. I didn't wear mine. I
You
had
have to
It's
save.
a planning and...
You have to save up and buy it yourself.
Oh, it's because I'm cheap.
I'm waiting for someone to give me one.
Hello, folks. I'd like to call to order this workshop of April 18th, 2023 to order. First of all, thank you very much for coming. Housekeeping. If there's no chairs here, please know that this is telecast in the City Council chambers. If anybody wants to sit down over there, they're more than welcome to go and you can listen. When we do have public comment, we will have it in the council chambers because it's best set up for that versus inside this room. So if we do have comment, we'll go into a small recess, move over there, get settled, have comment. Planning board, you have the front row reserved for you to sit during public comment. If our discussion lasts up until 7 o'clock-ish, what we'll do is we will call this workshop closed. We'll move over into the city council chambers. I'll call the meeting to order, and then I'll move on the agenda, our first public comment, to the very first item. That way we can open that up for people to have a chance to speak right then at 7 o'clock, okay? And again, planning board, more than invited, encouraged to sit down in the front row and be part of that. We put you up on the dais, but there's just not enough room, hence why we're in this chamber today, so we can have enough room to sit as equals. So with that, I'd like to go around the room and introduce everybody that's going to be participating today. And then I'm going to lay down just kind of the orientation of the meeting. Then I'm going to turn the meeting over to the chair, Stacy LeBlanc, to actually run the workshop portion of this. So I'm Jason Levesque. I'm the mayor. Again, thanks for being here today. We'll start off to my left and work my way around.
Evan Sear, Planning Board.
Tim DeRoche, Planning Board.
Dana Staples, City Council at Large.
Joseph Morin, City Council Ward 4.
Ryan Hawes, City Councilor, Ward 2.
Eric Cousins, Planning and Permitting Director.
John Blaze, planning staff.
No. Karen Scammon, City Assessor.
Sally Daggett, City Attorney.
Phil Kroll, City Manager.
David Trask, Planning Board.
Paul Jacques, Planning Board.
Rick Whiting, Ward 1 Counselor.
Steve Milks, City Council, Ward 3.
Leroy Walker, Ward 5 Counselor.
Belinda Gary, Auburn City Councilor at Large.
Tony Ferraro, Planning Board.
Stacy LeBlanc, Planning Board.
Okay, that's everybody. We still have a couple more planning board members that are going to be late, so hopefully they'll be here during this. So to set the stage, what we're here to talk about is a really good suggestion by city staff, so I want to thank them for this. But bringing the planning board and city council together, which is something that we have not done in over 5 years since I've been mayor, so it's well past time. We're here to discuss the amendments or language for a potential replacement of the income standard within the agricultural resource protection zone. We're not here to discuss whether or not the income standard should stay or should go, because both parties have voted that it should either go or be replaced. So those final debates can happen when the appropriate orders go through your respective bodies during a normal course of events. So we're here to talk about really those amendment texts. What does that mean? How does this affect Auburn, potential and future property owners, and so forth, okay? So we're gonna encourage lots of questions, a lot of to staff, and thanks staff for being there. It feels like a congressional inquiry, which is not as designed. So, Mr. Manager, do you have anything to add?
Just one clarifying point, Mayor. The City Council has voted to send the language to the Planning Board. They have not voted for the actual removal of the income standard.
Correct. They voted to send the language eliminating the income standard and asked for their recommendation on that language and or a replacement. So at this point, I'm going to turn it over to Stacy LeBlanc, Chair of the Planning Board. She's going to run this meeting.
Sure, yeah, and I'll be short and sweet. So to that end, yes, again, right, so we're all in agreement that we're ready to take the income standard off of in the text and off of the table, and at this point in time, we do have a text amendment. Thank you, Evan, for doing that. And this is where I'm going to hand it over to city staff to kind of do a readout for us and brief everybody, and then start having a conversation from a workshop perspective, and then hopefully come to a solid resolution at the end. And as noted too, we also have the assessor and the city attorney as well to help guide us should we need any of that as well. So I'll stop and hand it over.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, City Council, and Planning Board. We have had a number of meetings at the Planning Board level, as well as a number of meetings at the council level to clarify what the council is asking the Planning Board to consider. The sort of culmination of that at the March 28th meeting of the Planning Board resulted in a recommendation from the Planning Board that we should not eliminate the income standard unless there is something to replace it. And the Planning Board went beyond that and put forward a draft for consideration. From a staff perspective, what we're really looking to get out of this meeting is to go through that draft, make sure it achieves the outcomes that the Planning Board and Council want, and prepare a final version of that so we can do a public notice and hold a public hearing with the final version available for a Planning Board meeting in May. So really want to clarify as we go through that draft, is it the intent to allow residential uses separate from ag uses? I think the board made it clear in their recommendation that the replacement standard should maintain a connection of housing and agricultural uses. So that's, I think, really a policy decision that staff can't make. We just want to make sure that we know what to draft for the public hearing. Is there an intent to allow the creation of new lots at 10 acres apiece, maintaining the 10-acre density, that minimum lot size that the ag zone currently has? The current draft does that. And then based on what the changes are, staff can provide some feedback, and the city attorney as well, some feedback on what the process would look like and whether or not a comp plan amendment is necessary as part of the zoning amendment. We had a motion from the Planning Board. I think we've mentioned it. Board recommended that we not remove the income standard until such time as there is a reasonable alternative, but also making it clear that here's a draft that we can work from to try to fill in the details and make sure we have a text that accomplishes the outcomes that are desired. I'll flip to the board's language. I think there was a clear recognition at the board that the draft might still need some adjustments, but this is a great starting point, a framework to work from. Sorry, it's taking a second to get there. Okay. This recommendation was put forward, brought to the meeting by Evan Sear, but then endorsed by the Planning Board as the draft to work through. Makes no changes to the purpose of the zone. When you get to use regulations, it strikes the language that a dwelling is required to be accessory to farming, and then strikes the language that at least 30% of the gross income would be from an agricultural use of land, but does designate some land use-based standards that would keep the rural character of land in place on a lot that is developed for a house lot. Uses of the building envelope would be limited to no more than 20% of the land coverage upon the lot. So if you had a 10-acre lot, you could clear 2 acres for residential yard, accessory structures, house placement, driveway, that kind of thing under this draft. The residential development has some limitations. It's limited to residential structures, impervious surfaces accessory to residential use, driveways or accessory buildings, structures accessory to the residential use, and uses of land accessory to the residential use. You'd still be allowed to do any of the non-residential uses allowed in the zone, but it would restrict the residential use to no more than 20% of the lot. It also would require that the residential use avoid being sited on soils of state significance or prime farmland. Those are mapped resources that we have as existing maps that could be used to determine that. Unless it can be demonstrated to the planning department that non-prime farmland is not reasonably available, we'd want to make sure that we have some consistency about how that determination is made, if this is the language that's adopted, or that there be clarity added so that we can be consistent in making that decision and accomplishing the goals of that section. Avoid being sited on land determined to be essential habitat as defined by the State Department of Inland Fisheries and Wildlife. Again, these are existing maps that we could rely on for making those determinations. The second part of it, that not reasonably available determination, we would just want to make sure that either the ordinance language is clear about any standards used to make that determination, or that we have a policy to be consistent in making those decisions. Avoid being sited on land that is currently forested. Again, unless that land that is not forested is not reasonably available within the buildable area. Avoid being sited on wetlands. A lot of that is already regulated, similar to avoiding being sited on steep slopes. All of this discussion applies only to the agricultural zone outside of the Lake Auburn watershed. So that is explicit here, that these houses allowed in the ag zone would not be allowed in the Lake Auburn watershed portion of the agricultural zone, and not be sited on a portion of a parcel that has either been enrolled in one of the state current use tax program, the farmland program, tree growth, or that has been used to derive income through an agricultural use within any of the last 10 years. That one, as well as the forestry, within any of the last 10 years is problematic, I think, from a staff perspective, because we don't have a good mechanism to determine if somebody has derived income. So it really is not a standard that we could measure easily. The tax programs, I think, are measurable, but they do treat a property owner that's participated in the tax program differently, which could include, as an example, if there was a farmer that used the farmland tax program in any of the last 10 years, they would not be able to use that land that was in that program to build a house. So I think that's something to think about as you draft that policy, whereas somebody who didn't participate in those programs or didn't farm their land, generating any income, would have more flexibility in building a house than somebody who did. So I think that's an important concept to think about, and whether or not that's the goal. That is the bulk of the changes in this section of the ordinance. We can go through the rest, or do you want to talk a little bit about those changes?
Yeah, so my recommendation is that we talk about these changes currently today, like as of this moment, because I think it'll just be easier to address it versus having to backtrack as we go on to other items. And, I'll open it up with my question, but I'll also open it up to everyone else, which is, okay, I hear what you're saying about the problematic with the tax program, and then also treating them differently as well in that subsection. And I guess my question would be, what is the intent, right? So maybe this language is not conducive to whether it's being regulatory or treating it differently, but what is the intent, and can we think about a different way to potentially have language to meet the intent of that?
You're looking at me, I'm assuming, because I wrote it. I'm the one that has the intent. Yeah. My intent there was to de-incentivize converting active farm and forestry land to residential uses. And at first, actually, when I was kind of thinking, doing my thought map, I only used the state programs. And my intent with adding the, if they've been used to derive income, was essentially to capture those lots that Mr. Cousins just described, someone who might be engaging in forestry or agriculture, but who hasn't enrolled their property in one of those programs. So I'm hearing the piece that it's problematic for the city to be able to determine if income has been derived. But I think that there would need to be something there. But that was the intent, was to avoid someone from purchasing owning a piece of land now and saying, well, I can cash in on this, and immediately cash in on it by turning it to residential land if it has been used as farmland and forestry. We saw that in the survey that we got back, that was something folks wanted to avoid, the idea of farmland being converted to residential land.
Yeah, that's what staff assumed the intent was. We're just concerned about being able to verify if somebody had income from that, and whether or not it would limit a farmer more than it would limit somebody who's not a farmer. But I think that's certainly well intended to try to slow that pressure from agricultural land.
Isn't there already this for Karen, if someone's enrolled in one of these programs, the Maine Revenue Service current land use programs, is there a clawback period? I.e., if you unenroll on that in agriculture, do you have a clawback period? Because you have to file annually, correct? I'm wondering if the state already accomplishes intent.
Okay. For any of these programs, you do not have to file annually. Are you thinking of a penalty, perhaps? Is that what we're discussing here? There's no time limit that you can have your land in these programs. And once they're in, they're in. Obviously, you can withdraw at any time that you want and pay that penalty based on how long it's been in the program.
Okay, yeah, okay, I see it here. It says if property no longer qualifies as open space, a penalty be assessed using the same methodology as is used for the removal from the tree growth program.
Yes.
So
Yep.
basically, and I'm just going to paraphrase this, if someone is enrolled in the agricultural tax rebate program or the open space program for a period of time, and they decide that they don't want to be part of this program any longer, and they can remove themselves, there's probably no claw back for the previous years. Or there is a clawback.
Yeah, I mean, you're going to pay back a portion of those taxes, absolutely. That's what it's based on. Now, you're talking, you keep saying open space. That's not even in this proposal, which I had a comment about. You're talking about, you put farmland and you put tree growth in here. Open space isn't mentioned anywhere in here, and that's another special land use classification. So I don't know if that was an oversight or you didn't want it in there, but it's not there.
That was because the surveys we got back were expressed the desire for open space, but specifically expressed the desire not to change from active farmland and forest land to residential use. So that's why those were focused on in my draft.
I think to keep it moving then, okay, open space, hey, listen, I'm participating right now. I think open space, because it's already a program within the state, and Karen just mentioned it, I think it's important. People talk about recreational access. The open space tax rebate program, I believe we only have 5 parcels in Auburn.
We
Very
now have
minimal.
6.
We have 6 now.
We have 6 now.
Oh, great. I'd like the addresses because I want to recreate on those lands. The trade-off is you get a rebate on your property taxes in order to open your land up for, non-destructive public use, recreation.
Yeah, not a rebate, but you get a tax, it's like a tax incentive. You're not paying as much tax on the front end. So it's not a rebate, but you're not paying as much tax because you're getting a discount.
So
on
a
the
reduced
land, on the
valuation.
valuation of the land.
Which I think is important to know because it's another tool that property owners could use to protect their land and keep that open, or in agriculture or in tree growth, which is some of the goals outlined in the comp plan. Okay, and I was just trying to think if that was your intent, Evan, was that, someone just can't stop, their 150 acres of haying operations to build one house.
Yeah, that was the intent.
So in this language, there's a lot of avoid being cited on, and like, to me, when I read this, I see, to me, it looks like you can get around these things pretty easily. Eric, could you speak to that?
And we would want to make sure that we're consistent in that. It is a way to, if there is property owner demonstrates that their entire lot is forested, I guess would be a good example. Then there's no land on their lot that isn't forested. Then they could make a case for an exception to that standard so that they could clear, 20% of the lot for a residential use. If you had a lot that, had sort of competing resources where some of it's wetland, some of it's prime farm soils, and some of it's forested, and you could avoid the wetlands and prime soils by clearing a forested portion that's neither of those. Those are where it would be a little bit more complicated to decide where to site the house. Not saying that we couldn't do that. I would just want to make sure that we have a consistent either prioritization or method for making those decisions so that they're not arbitrary.
Okay, so for clarity, it's more of this is where a house could potentially be sited on a parcel rather than this is a parcel that should be developed. Is that what that's for?
I'm reading it more as within the bounds of the parcel. We would have to make sure that they're avoiding these resources, forested land, wetlands, and prime or significant soils. The greatest extent that's practical. There may be some lots that if you avoid all of those things, there's no place left to build the house. And I think this aims to still allow for the house to avoid those resources the best they can.
Okay, so thank you for that, Dana. So to that end, so I think we were kind of talking a little bit about that section 6, and I think, and then you went up to the cited on wetlands. So how do people feel if we start with just the B, new residential dwelling shall, right, and subsection I1, avoid being cited on soils, and how do people feel about that? Or is there any discussion? Are people in agreement with that?
Stacy, I guess I have one question as to, I noticed that there's also an attorney version that does have some changes, and I didn't know if we wanted to see what those were so that we could factor those into the discussion, or how did we want to play that out?
I'll scroll to that section. That should help define those decisions a little more.
I guess just for general conversation, starting with Evan's version and then going to the attorney's version, I think is a good process. That way we know where we're starting and kind of what our thought process was as we made some of these edits. I think this is a good way to move forward.
Thank you, John.
And I don't know, Sally, did you want a chance at all to explain the highlighting and some of the edits that you made in those sections?
And I just want to say this was sort of a combination city attorney staff draft. So the parts that you like are to be credited to staff, and the parts you don't like you can blame on me. But We tried to clean the planning board's draft up to make it read better, and you can also see that the items that are highlighted in yellow are where I thought we were making substantive changes. So I don't know if you want to focus on those, but on a lot of the text, it was cleaning up the language and making it read better. We did tweak the requirements about the open space and, the farm and tree growth programs, just to make that, to address the staff concern about not being able to enforce sort of the planning board draft. But if you'd like, we can walk through those changes, or maybe just want to focus on those changes.
And I think that the 6.1 acre, 10 acre change in this section was because if there wasn't a connection any longer to farming, there was really no reason to treat those lots between 6.1 and 10 acres differently.
If I could, I understand that was actually a question I had for a little bit later on, so I'm glad this is addressed. Just if you don't remember, 4 years ago, 3.5 years ago, during the last agricultural debate, what we did is we modified the income standard from 50% of a family to 30% of the individual's income to be capped at 30% of the average or median income in the city. And we also allowed any lot that existed prior to, correct me on this date, January 1 of 2017, I believe.
I think that's correct.
October 1.
October 1 of 2017. If it was 6.1 acres or greater, then you could actually have a dwelling unit on that. So that's where that 6.1 came from. But if we, as a group, Madam Chair, just like 1A, and then kind of hammer that out, and then move on to B, so we could take it in nice manageable chunks. And I'd recommend, one question and then an idea, on parcels containing no less than 6.1 acres as of October of 2017. I think it's important that we keep that grandfathering in there, but that's up for discussion. There was an intent on that back then. It was to stop any type of land speculation and splitting, which I don't think's happened, but I think it's important that we maintain.
And I think, Mr. Mayor, the issue about the October 1, 2017, you have to jump ahead to section 60-146, the dimensional requirements there in, I guess it's subsection 1C. And that's where you sort of flesh out this whole October 1, 2017, are these existing lots or new lots? And so you have to read, quite frankly, that section 60-145A1 in conjunction with the dimensional requirements. Can't see behind me, so I don't know if Eric's flipping those up on the screen or not. But
So that's substantial changes, obviously. And then you're looking at density as well if you open it up to anything above 6.1, which is in violation, I believe, of the comprehensive plan, which has density at 1 unit per 10 acres. But by changing it to 6.1 or 1 unit per 6.1 acres, that increases the density by 40%, which would be in conflict, in my opinion. Correct me if I'm wrong. Is that true, or?
we were just trying to flesh out what we thought was the planning board's intent here about treating these, but I it's obviously a policy decision about whether I think it's confusing to have the 6.1 and then the 10 acres, so that's part of what I think we want to have a discussion about tonight is what are we doing with the 6.1 versus the 10 acres?
Yeah, and I think at the time, the goal of the 6.1, and maybe it's not as necessary now, was the council was trying to expand the opportunity for farms and to allow a house accessory to a farm on a lot that exists prior to that date, if they were farming. So if they met the income standard, then why were we stopping a farm from happening with a house on a lot over 6 acres but less than 10? Not to create any new lots less than 10, but those existed.
So as a follow-up, if we added that in, and let's say we added the parcel, I just saw the language, we just scrolled past it, as of October 1, 2017, to the above reference points, would that be in conflict, in your opinion, with a comprehensive plan?
I think when we get, I think there are probably some issues, depending on where everybody lands, with consistency with the comprehensive plan. So I think that we want to see what the council and the planning board collectively want to proceed with, and then we can weigh in on the consistency with comprehensive plan issue. But I think there are some issues with this approach generally, and I think the staff concurs with that. So, you know, I don't want to pick out different little pieces here and there, because it's all going to depend on what sort of where you end up generally and how you want to proceed. And that's obviously why we're here, is like, where do you want to go? And then we can work on the language, and then we can assess, you know, do there also need to be some comp plan amendments?
Okay, so just so I'm hearing you correctly. So this was reviewed, right, by city attorney yourself, right? And then the recommendation was the 6.1 acres. And that's the recommendation, but yet we're not clear necessarily if that might be in conflict with the comp plan. So I just want to make sure that we vetted everything, if that's what the recommendation is. We're making a recommendation, but it's not fully vetted out. I'm just trying to understand.
That 6.1 acres is part of the current ordinance. So you can build a home accessory to a farm on a lot that is larger than 6.1 acres currently.
So currently in the ordinance, it's a home, an accessory to a farm. So if we're going to remove that requirement that a home needs to be accessory to a farm, then maybe we should strike the 6.1 and just go with 10.
And we're looking for feedback like that so we can make sure the draft reflects your desires for the planning board meeting.
And the other part of that, though, is that there's existing lots today, as we speak, that are under that requirement, under 10 acres. And we were just saying, if, you know, what's the possibility of a residential home in that area, in those particular lots? There's a lot of smaller lots out there that haven't been buildable. You know, I don't know if we get in an equity issue there, but there's certainly the opportunity. If it's an existing lot and it was established prior to 2017, there could be a thought process that at least those lots, I'm not saying establishing any new lots over 10 acres, but at least the existing lots have the ability to build a house if they have a suitable septic system and can meet the separation for a well. And then they're limited to the 20% of the impact of that specific lot to at least, you know, put a residential house on that particular location. I know at a quick glance, we had about 13 of those opportunities across this area that we're talking about. So that's the impact to the city for that opportunity, specifically for those smaller lots under 10 acres.
And I think if the decision is made that housing is not connected to agriculture, those smaller lots are generally less useful for agriculture than the larger lots.
So I'll say, I think when we talked about it, it seemed like the planning board members, what I remember is that weren't necessarily looking to reduce density, or I should say to increase density. So I was surprised that in the permitted uses that was dropped down to 6.1 acres. And to kind of get to Dana's question, it kind of mirrors John's comment, which was that whole 6.1 acre lot thing is weird and it's problematic. I chose to leave it in my draft because I thought it was important to have the discussion about, because then at that point what we're really discussing is, are we going to make lots that are currently conforming and buildable, non-buildable, right? That's what that discussion becomes there, right? Since we have those lots that are 6.1 acres, between 6.1 and 10 that are currently buildable, right? Like, yeah, do we want to now, if we just go to 10, we're saying you are no longer buildable. I thought that was a discussion that needed to be had, so.
And it does become less necessary if there's not an approval process with the income standard. A farm had a minimum lot size of 10 acres prior to that change, even if the lot was legally existing, had existed for 100 years. We could not approve a house. If If housing was allowed, then generally non-conforming lots that are legally existing, they were created prior to us having a standard, that minimum lot size would not apply. But it would not allow the creation of new lots that are less than the 10-acre minimum. So I think in effect, if housing was allowed, not connected to agriculture with that specific 10-acre requirement for a farm, those non-conforming lots would become able to propose a house.
You're saying there's 13 lots that fit?
Yeah,
in
there's
that
not
ag
not
zone?
many.
So that's a minimal impact to the ag zone, but that would be a significant impact to the people that own those lots, which is my biggest argument with the income standard is it's unfair.
And I think, just to clarify, John, is the 13 lots, is that between 6.1 and 10 acres, or is that all of the lots less than 10?
I keep hitting that button.
I think that's the ones
I think
between
it's-
6.1 and 10.
Yeah, I thought there was 13 altogether, but
Okay.
we could certainly run that down and have an exact number.
Well, I mean, my question is why wouldn't we have, if there's a lot that's 2 or 3 acres in the existing ag zone, it's not the national park, and it's not going to be a farm, and it's not going to be, vital land that we need to keep for generations, then why can't somebody build a house there?
Yeah, it's less useful than a large lot for agricultural purposes.
We also, we have people here that definitely have less than 3 acres of land that are looking for us to talk about that because they've been wanting to build for years and they haven't been able to build at this point there because of the income standards that we've kept in place.
Yeah, I would say, if the lot was created prior to the creation of the ag zone in the 60s, and it's less than 10 acres, I would say that would make sense that lot could be buildable. But if it's somebody who subdivided a lot, split a lot after the 10-acre minimum was created, to me, it's speculative, and I don't know that we should reward that behavior.
Well, there's some people that have maybe did that actually is not here today. The land was picked up by either being donated or inherited or whatever. So that makes a big difference. A lot of land was split off in the 60s and 70s after this all came about, and people have banged their heads against the wall many times trying to figure out how they can get around that for not having 10 acres or more.
And I think if it's not required to go through a farm approval process that requires 10 acres, then essentially these legally existing non-conforming lots would be allowed the same permissions as other lots that are over
And we're going to have maps that show that land is wetlands, that is vital, nothing in the the watershed, land that's not existing ag land. So it's going to have to be land that fits those descriptions to be able to be built on. If they're non-conforming lot, and I don't think we should be inferring intent on people. It should either be it is or it isn't, not, well, that guy's speculating, because I think that's very bad policy. So I think we need to make the rule is what it is or it isn't. But if it doesn't fall into one of these maps that says we need to protect this land for a particular reason, then it should qualify. I think we need to have rules that are meant to be rules for specific reasons. That's fair.
Back in the initial resolution from the council that kicked this off, one of the things we are starting to see, and we've seen it, is people doing petitions to change the zone in which their land is. So, this is supposed to help alleviate that administrative or bureaucratic burden as well. It was one of the reasons the council agreed on. We're not going to solve, I think, all the problems for everybody at one time. It's just impossible. But if we stuck to 6.1 acres as of October 1 of 2017, it helps compromise and limit some of the speculative nature. That's why it was there to begin with. but then it minimizes the number of people with smaller lots that can actually go to planning board and staff and ask for and appeal their zoning decision and go to the next possible residential zone. That probably is the impasse, and it's more manageable that way, and it solves that problem.
Eric, is that possible? Can they come to you at smaller lots?
So I think you could achieve most of that if you did not if you weren't specific about the 6.1 acres, but any non-conforming lots existing prior to October 2017 would essentially achieve that. The 6.1 is just an odd number.
So any non-conforming
Under 10 that existed prior to 2017, October of 2017.
And Eric, that 20% would apply to regardless of the size of the lot?
That the way that it's written. So if you had 1 acre, 10% is 4,300 square feet. You have about 8,000 square feet to work in. So yeah, the 20% is based on the total lot size.
So I just have a comment. Going back to being able to build if your land is in one of these special land use classifications, farmland, tree growth, you have 30 acres that you have put in the classification. However, you have kept out 2 acres for whatever reason. You just said, I'm going to keep this out, carve this piece out. Because it's not 6.1 acres, is that now also non-buildable? Or does that parcel have to meet the 6.1 acre minimum lot size? And if so, now you have people that can build on your 6.1 acres that are non-conforming lots, but you're not allowing the people that have put their land in a special land use classification and only held out an acre or 2. Just a thought.
They would
I would say
qualify
that-
in my book.
Yeah,
You'd be able to build a house on that 2 acres is what I would like to see.
because that special land use doesn't reduce the size of the lot still, it just reduces the size of the buildable portion of the lot, so I would say that would still make sense.
Yeah, and the intent of the language was that, so for instance, we'll use a standard 10-acre lot. If someone placed 9 acres of that 10 acres in a state program, the language that I proposed, you wouldn't be able to build a house on those 9 of the 10 acres for 10 years after being enrolled. But the 1 acre that was never enrolled, so you could build on that portion of the property.
Okay, so in the interest of time, my question is, moving forward, are we in agreement with the 6.1 or do we want to keep the 10?
Steve, I think keep the 10 with the appeals process.
And this is for Sally and staff to take back too, and obviously vet further if needed.
I mean,
I think any lot that exists, that's what I think. That's what, anything under 10. I mean, I don't, if you got 20 acres and you put 19 and something, you should be able to build on 1. If you have, I don't understand the restriction.
I think one potential reason that we might want to keep it at 10, and you guys, I'm open to this, but whatever, the reason that I'm thinking of is that inside of the comp plan, there is special language that says if there should be a petition process for the ag zone. And that would potentially allow this to not go back to review because we'd be changing the density.
I'm kind of concerned about just the effect of the overall, proposal, which I think makes Swiss cheese out of the ag zone. So you have house lots wherever people can build them. When I heard 13 lots and grandfathering, I thought, well, that's not a big deal. That's sort of dancing on a pin because that's a lesser issue, and I'd be fine with that. But if you open it up to any lot that's smaller, we don't even know how many there are. And this is the kind of problem that we're having with this. We're rushing this, haste makes waste, and a lot of people are going to be unhappy with it because we've done this. I think the processes that were identified by the SNRB and by the Good Food Council with citizen involvement and thoughtful consideration, not to say you wouldn't make changes, but I kind of liked what the city staff talked about, which was and the planning board didn't adopt it, which was to look at individual rezonings that would be in compliance with a comprehensive plan, looking at growing from the center out, adjacency, access to water and sewer, city services, et cetera. And I'd like to know why the planning board didn't look at that.
If I could, with some legacy knowledge, I think that process was started when the city paid $50,000 for the Crossroads report in 2018. 2017, it was revealed in 2018. In 2018, 2 ad hoc committees, planning board, city council meetings, hundreds and hundreds of hours of debate, discussion, public discussion, led to zero, really fundamentally zero change. The change from 50% to 30% had zero effect on the number of farms within the city or land use. It just continued to prevent anything. This has been an evolution, I think, with regards to process support, for everybody to know that this has been an ongoing process and discussion since the 80s and just very active in the last 7 years. So, I don't want to say that that process that you're describing or others have described hasn't happened. It has.
Okay, so back to what we're talking about, which is this text amendment. So are we in agreement with 6 or are we in agreement with 10?
I wanted to comment before that question. From my school of thought, I can't help but say it only makes sense that if people own land, they should be able to build on it. And Swiss cheesing or not, I know it's going to put houses in all kinds of different places if it passes. But people inherently have the right as American homeowners or property owners to build a home on their property if they wish to do so. That's just my opinion.
Before you jump in, I heard Councilor Whiting make a comment that seemed to imply that the amendment creates more house lots than currently exist. And if we maintain the 10-acre minimum lot size, it doesn't create more lots than could already currently exist. And I think it's important that we know that the ag zone is written in such a way, and it's the only zone that's written this way in the city ordinance. It uses street frontage, not lot width, which then requires that you have frontage on an accepted city way. So you can't build say a private road and do you couldn't carve up 900 acres into a 90 house subdivision with a private road under the current ordinance, and that didn't change under any of the proposed language either. So I think it's important that we recognize that we're not trying to increase. We're not talking about increasing the number of homes that can be built. We're really talking about, if we're not going to have an income standard for those homes, what's a reasonable standard to make sure that that home is not detrimental to the zone, right? We're not talking about adding more homes than could currently be allowed. That's important, and I think that is a huge fallacy, and it's one of the hardest things to push back against. I don't know how to explain that to folks who won't listen to that, but the density is not changing, and a lot requires road frontage in this zone, and that's not changing.
I guess I have a question for the city attorney. Just thinking ahead with the fiscal impacts on the city, is it still legal to charge impact fees for development?
If the city has an impact fee ordinance and you go through the steps to develop, a specific impact fee related to a certain, development area, and I defer to Eric to answer the specifics, but.
We'd have to be very specific about impacts that have a direct connection to the new housing. And I don't know if that could, I haven't seen one that takes into account, taking land away from agriculture, whether or not that could be an impact that could be used to fund improvements in agriculture elsewhere. certainly is used for water and sewer and other utility extensions, schools, things like that, that have a direct link to that new service call based on the new home.
Okay, so in the interest of time, what are we suggesting, 10 or 6? I'd like to get some consensus here on it. Does that,
I'm going to go 10, knowing there's a small amount that can go to an appeals process set up at a future time. So
seems
it's fair.
reasonable?
And I prefer 10, and we already had a special exception for those other lots, and I think it would be reasonable to discuss a mechanism for those lots, but I think the minimum lot size should be 10.
Okay.
I agree with the 10-acre minimum as well.
Okay, excellent.
Just to clarify, you can see in the draft that, depending on the size of the lot, you may have to, as a lot owner, either go to the code enforcement officer for this review, or if you have sort of a smaller lot, you have to go to the planning board for special exception approval. So I just want to, I think where you're headed is a consensus that maybe so lots that were 10 acres or less than 10 acres as of October 1st, 2017, they can build a house as of right, but maybe those go through special exception review and approval from the planning board. But if you got more than 10 acres, either as a new lot or a lot that existed as of or before October 1, 2017, those can go to the code enforcement office as a permitted use.
That's the way that I understand it.
Okay.
That's the way I understand it. Thank you, Sally.
Okay, excellent. Did you have a question?
From what I'm understanding is if we do this and allow people, I'm just asking questions. I'm not going to say I'm for or against this stuff. But if we allow people to build in ag land that's not an ag use, from what I'm understanding is that property, that footprint, won't be taxed as farmland. Is that correct? So they will have to pay a little bit more in their taxes. How will that have any unintended consequences to the abutters around them?
It's not necessarily the abutters around them, and it's not what's going to affect valuation and what's going to affect the increase in the valuation is if the income standard goes away and those 10-acre lots now become house lots. Then, unless you have your land encumbered by a special land use classification, then those 10-acre lots, regardless of whether you want to build on it or not, will be assessed as a house lot.
And for clarification, a house lot, if you have a 10-acre lot, your value on the first acre or the second acre is as your primary footprint for that home, correct?
Right now, it's 1 acre.
So 1 acre, which is in
Is
theory.
primary.
So 1 acre is primary, and that's less than obviously the 20%, which is allowable. So if I had a 10-acre lot, the residential value would be assessed on the first acre and not the subsequent acres.
It's on a sliding scale, but the rest of it would be assessed at less.
Okay, excellent. So I feel like we're in agreement that we're moving forward with the 10 acres. And so do we want to move on to the next section, which is the recommendation of the one-family detached dwelling residential development shall comprise of no more than 20% of the land coverage. I think there was some other language about and a 20% envelope. So I guess I'll stop right here and see if people have questions around this. I don't see anything from City Attorney that you guys, you've changed the language a little bit. Were there any questions, comments? Do people, are you in agreement?
A question on the 20%. There was already one question, but I'm assuming that's not impervious. That's just sort of cleared area and impervious?
Yeah, the portion of the lot that's used for residential purposes is the way that I read it. So it'd be the, you know, the yard, any accessory structures, impervious driveways. That
All right, so I think we can move on. I'm not seeing any real objections to that. Any questions, comments? Okay, perfect. All right, so going on to B, no one-family detached dwelling shall avoid being, and then you can go, I'm not going to read it verbatim for you all. I think you've had a chance to look at it. I see one edit from the city attorney, which I think you just noted that code enforcement. So as we were reviewing this from city staff and they were going through this, I did not hear anything from staff that you guys had an objection to this subsection. I don't see anything necessarily from, you know, the assessors or either from the attorney that anyone has any questions. So if you don't, then we can move on to the next section. And I'm assuming everyone's had a chance to read this, everyone's had a chance to digest it. You've come prepared with questions, comments, thoughts.
My only comment is that I think we sort of did hear loud and clear that, and this is in the I mean, it's not expressly in the comp plan, but I think it's intrinsically in the comp plan that that we don't want to convert ag land to non-ag use. Like that's, the preference would be to maintain it as ag land. So I know that in Sally and staff's edit, they took out the derived income standard from B6. I understand they did that because it's problematic, but I would like to get staff's opinion, or I would like that to be a future discussion for us. What's a way that we could possibly maintain that goal, if that's something we want to do, that goal of discouraging direct flip from farm and forestry to residential.
Is everyone following Evan right now where he's at? Okay. So it's going back to that, you know, the removal of, or having to evaluate that tax program, et cetera, et cetera. And again, we circled back. Staff said this was an issue on several different levels. I asked the intent. Evan just reiterated what the intent is. I guess I'll see if anyone has any questions, thoughts, comments.
I mean, I agree with you, but I don't know a good way to check that.
I'm sorry, I had a hard time with your hearing.
So I'm saying I think that Mr. Sears' idea here is good. It's just I'm not sure what the mechanism would be to check whether or not farmland has been used to profit on.
Why don't we just simply state no residence can be built on any parcel or portion of parcel that was enrolled within one of the state either farmland or ag growth or ag areas until it's been unenrolled for a period of 5 years.
I'm wondering, you know, Evan was talking about, you know, trying to replace the income standard, and I was thinking, you know, we ratcheted it from 50% down to 30%. Maybe we ratchet it down to the state standard and then have a percentage of use on the land. I don't know how clunky that might be. That would be a good staff question.
Listen, that was proposed in 2018, which is a state standard for ag is $2,000 filed on a Schedule F of your federal IRS tax refund. That is also the state standard as well for being enrolled in the ag program. That didn't pass. But that is the state and federal standard of definition of an ag, of a farm, is $2,000 annually. That's a rollback to that. And then at that point, you're tying into, you know, enrolling in the ag program or something. I mean, it's been proposed. That's all I want to say.
So from a staff perspective, you knew this from the beginning that this was going to be an issue. I think we had some thoughts around what the intent is. So do you have a suggestion?
Yeah, I think using those state tax programs are one way to do that. We just don't have a way to measure whether or not somebody used their land for agriculture in the last 10 years. There's no record of it that we could review to make that determination.
Is there a record of income generated? If I'm starting a farm and I build a house, are we checking right now to ensure that I'm meeting that 30% threshold?
we're looking either at existing income from previous year's tax returns or at pro formas and making sure that they build what they said they were going to build for the agricultural use.
And I haven't been present at any of the planning board discussions on this, but, I mean, what about a standard that where the burden is on the property owner to demonstrate that it's, been used for agriculture, rather than focusing on the income, have the property owner, and it's their burden, show that the property, has been.
Well, so what happens if I purchase it, and then the person doesn't have it to show?
And that's you can see that's why we sort of took this out.
Mm-hmm.
I'm just saying, if you wanted to have something in the ordinance for language, I mean, you could put the burden on the property owner, and whether the property owner just acquired the property, then it's their hunt to go track down the former owner and have the former owner assist in that. And that's an alternative, but you can see that's why staff sort of took it out, because we think that it's just very difficult.
So the owner of the parcel prove that this has not been used in ag for a period of X years.
Right.
And I think if you do that, then you just have to decide if you want to limit a farmer from building a house more so than somebody who didn't use their land for farming.
Yeah.
Can you repeat that?
So if you do that, then you're telling a farmer that used their land for farming that they can't build a house. But if you have land that wasn't farmed, then anybody could build a house. So I think we may still want to allow for a true farmer that meets a standard to build a house.
Yeah, that's exactly why I did a lot of the edits. So that's exactly the reason why we eliminated the ag piece on that particular one, B. And then looking at D, which was the forestry stuff. Forestry is, fundamental to Maine in general, and then cutting, trees on their property if they have big lots, if they're going to develop a lot for residential use, and then cutting trees and creating income from that as a typical Mainer that lives in Auburn in the rural area, doing that as a common practice is something that we haven't tracked as an agricultural use here. I don't know why we would impose it as a new rule here. So that's another reason why we kind of eliminated that piece. So
Could we instead of maybe what we could do is say to unenroll in a state program and have a change in ownership of the parcel in the last, say, a number 5 years, whatever it is, because that way. So if I own a piece of land and I'm a farmer and I want to enroll in this, and then I retire and I want to build a house, I should be able to do that. But if I have a farm and I sell the piece of land to somebody else, then there's an argument there that seems like it's maybe that's not this. It should be treated the same way.
From a pragmatic standpoint, we actually already accomplished this by limiting development to 20% of the parcel. If you have and if you're setting aside land, 20% of your parcel to build a farm, okay, a home, residence, that's 20%. Okay, that's good. Actually, that's probably what we want to encourage to happen, because chances are they're not going to site that home on the most productive and valuable piece of agricultural land within that parcel. I think we accomplished it. I think we might be a little overkill on this. What we're trying to prevent is someone going in and doing a massive PUD or plan unit development on 20 acres of ag land that's currently hayed. But there's already special exemptions in place for that. Someone has to go to planning board if it's even allowed. You have to get approval. There's checks and balances. Those just can't happen. So I think this is actually a solution, probably searching for a problem that doesn't exist. And we can't turn around and go backwards, if you would, and get rid of one unfairness and substitute with another unfairness.
I guess I have a question, because I think we heard a lot of constituents say that with regard to the zone and sort of how things might change, and I guess I'm wondering about if we didn't have any of those sections, either B or D, would that suddenly become, like, how would that impact? Would it still be, the entire property still be ag zone, and it wouldn't change? So it's not like it would suddenly become rural residential and they can't, it's on land that they wouldn't be using anyway. Because we heard a lot of people sort of say the extension of if the zone, the strip zone and how that impacts. So would this impact that at all?
No.
Okay.
And I guess to add, if we want to add something to this, and certainly playing to Karen's point, the open space provision, I think that should be considered as well, adding that language in there. Currently enrolled in the open space program should be added in this section. If we're going to identify all the programs that are available to the state, this would be a location that we would potentially put that in here as well.
And I think the reality is that under Karen's program, the person has to take that piece of land out of the current use program to build the house in the first place. You can't
So,
have a parcel in
I have a question.
farmland and build the house in the middle of the designated farmland, or could you?
That's why I brought up the 6.1 and the 1, because I have a lot of applications that have designated farmland area. They also have, their wet area, their ponds, but they've also retained an acre or 2 acres or a piece out of that land that they have not designated that is being right now assessed as straight up ag land. So it doesn't have the benefit of this special price per acre that you do in the classified land. So if it's worded as such, then I am under the assumption that now that parcel of land that they have held out of the designated areas, the classified areas, would become buildable, and it would become a house lot. Now, not all applications are submitted like that. Some of them have encumbered the entire parcel of land and don't have that extra piece to the puzzle, but there are several in there that do.
But those that encumber the entire piece would have to remove a portion of it.
Yes, they would, yes.
From the program.
I think we probably should add on section 6 a C, currently enrolled in open space, which is the other one, the other major tax program, and then eliminate anything else that has a punitive process, i.e. 5 or 10 years. I think we've accomplished, the setting aside and protection of resources by adding open space. You can couple these all together and get up to 95% of your taxes waived, by the way, on that land, 95% if you couple them all up together. So I think if we just add that and then eliminate the other portions per legal advice, I think that would solve this problem.
I do like that.
If we do that, then you should just get rid of 6, because we just heard that you can't put a house on the portion of the lot that's enrolled in those state programs. So, I mean, we can leave it there as a redundancy, but if that's the reality, then...
Unless you've held a portion of your land out, if you have it classified, it's classified, and you would have to go through the process of removing it and paying the penalty to be able to build on it.
And so that addresses the intent, Evan, right? Circling back, your intent was to not flip all these lots, to have them buildable.
It does not, in my opinion. I'll tell you that this does not actually meet my intent, but I assume we will take that up when we kind of enter into deeper debate at the planning board level.
Okay.
It seems that your intent really was tied to that period of time to relieve the pressure on that land, the immediate pressure, I guess?
Yeah, that's
correct.
Exactly, that's what I was saying. Yep.
One question. I know the review, the city attorney review added the highlights for the new things that were added, but yet I had to compare Evan's version to realize that that B and D had been removed. Are there other areas that were in Evans that were struck that aren't being highlighted here because they were just removed without? I don't want to have to go back and forth to figure out what edits were done.
I'll let John answer because, and it was hard because I think Evan's draft it wasn't like in track changes, it was like just red text. And then when we started redlining, it was red on top of red, and they were like two different shades of red. But so it was very difficult. And we apologize. We were not able to produce a really neat and clean red line version of comparing the planning board version to the staff version. But John took a pretty good stab at edits, so I'll let him speak.
It certainly wasn't the intent to, delete something and then, have it just show up as that. It was the process of editing the documents, and certainly we could clean that up for a planning board meeting and just really take a real thorough look at that, what the original edits were, and making sure that that's very clear in the next iteration with planning board.
All right, so to that end, in the interest of time, I guess I would ask to see, to your point too, Dave, to see what are the other legal suggestions that you made in conjunction with what Evan's draft was, and so that we can address it.
I'm scrolling through that version. Relatively minor on 16, just a correction. The 6.1 acres comes up again here as a special exception, I believe. Let me go back to that heading. Yep. So there would still be a planning board process for somebody to propose a house on a lot that is greater than 6.1, but less than 10 as a special exception.
I think we just said less than 10.
Okay. Is that how you want the draft to read, then, is less than 10, not 6.1 to 10?
What do people think? Yep. I see nodding heads. Okay, good. I like
Clarified
nodding.
one-family detached dwelling and residential development, so that would be the entire envelope used for the residential purpose.
Should we maybe add a definition to that phrase of one, family detached dwelling residential development?
That it
Just-
encompasses the
yeah.
cleared lawn, accessory uses,
Yeah.
and, yep, we
Yeah.
could do that.
Everyone okay with that, to really nail down what the 20% is, of? And what
I
it
love that, by the
includes?
way.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yep.
Here, where it's a special exception, it requires that the planning board would make those determinations on the lots less than 10 acres of whether or not they're avoiding farmland soils, habitat, wetlands.
Does that have to go to planning board, or can that be staff?
So right now, those smaller lots, those less than 10 acre lots would go to planning board. And the way this is drafted, that would still be the case, but there are relatively few. I think that's a function the planning board could certainly.
Isn't there something in ordinance that sends some of those lots to the agriculture subcommittee of the SNRB?
Yeah, I believe actually, if we reference, and I have it here, that's yet to be really determined. We have the Board of Appeals, but in the comp plan was directed that the city generate a process. A special exemption could be that process with planning board, or it could be a separate board or adjudicatory body that would look at those types of
What
appeals.
my goal would be, whatever is the least oppressive for the citizen.
And the current ordinance on those smaller lots requires the Agricultural Advisory Committee provide a recommendation to the planning board. That is struck in the draft. Yeah, that is struck in this draft. Because there's really no connection required any longer for farming. So what would the Agricultural Committee review?
Well, the
It would be something, my goal would be something that could be done quickly, expeditiously, and make sure that we're not putting it on something critical, but I don't see why staff can't, I don't see why that would have to go to the planning board.
It's up to council and planning board to make that decision. I think in this case, we were creating a permission, a special exception permission for lots less than the minimum lot size that were legally existing, to have a process to go to the Ag Committee and Planning Board to be approved. If they're not tied to a farm, then many of those decision points are no longer part of the process. So it is simplified in that sense.
Good. So my request would be we make that as easy for the citizen as possible.
And I'll just add that the usual reason for there being a planning board review process, which is what a special exception use requires planning board review and approval. It's so that there's notice to the neighbors. If everything is just a permitted use, whether it's under 10 acres or more than 10 acres, that means there's going to be no public real process involved with these applications. They're just going to go straight to the code enforcement officer, and the neighbors won't know that an application's been filed. They won't know that an application's been approved. So that, I'm just saying, that's the reason for having special exception planning board review. So for those smaller, less than 10 acres lots, that is what we, I guess, discussed earlier. There is a process, so the neighbors get notice and can participate.
And I think that process is important. I think, I hear what you're saying. I would propose that we keep it with a special exemption. We'll see how this goes for a couple months. Okay, and if modification needs to happen, again, we're only talking about 13 lots. If we have to modify it to solve that, we can make that determination a little bit later, but let's see how this process rolls.
No,
Okay?
yeah, I agree. I mean, because I definitely hear what you're saying, and I'm in alignment with you as well, right? Like making it, but I am in agreement with the planning board, but yep. No, absolutely.
So it does say that you have to maintain the lot in compliance with those standards that you committed to on the front end, the 20% of the lot being used for residential purposes. I don't think there's anything substantive related to housing. Okay, the October 2017 date still exists for those non-conforming lots.
So can you scroll to, yep, we're right there in the dimensional regulations. So section 3, subsection C, the maximum depth of 30%. So Evan, was that your suggestion? I'm saying it in red. It's not in yet. So again, just wanting to know the intent.
Yeah, my sense, and Evan can certainly correct us, is that they were trying to keep the development of the lot for residential purposes from being extended too deep into the lot and impacting more land, but that's...
Yeah, generally, so we have setbacks to keep, our buildings and development away from sort of lot boundaries, right? But Eric is right. The intent there was specifically to say there's a small building envelope on this lot, and it's within the first 30% of the lot, so as to maintain the contiguous open space nature of the rear of the lots. So we have a lot of back lots, and so these lots are all going to, back up to back lots and their neighbors. And the idea was to prevent development at the rear to promote a contiguous forest or open space land or whatever is currently there.
All right, so I'll open it up for folks and see any other thoughts, suggestions, comments. I know we've had some heavy hits. Go ahead.
So one thing that I was hoping we could incorporate into this, and perhaps this is a different, it could be done outside of a zone change, but I would like to see something done to protect farms and soil within the ag RP zone, and if there's some sort of way that we could check to see if new development is negatively affecting anything that's currently inside of the ag RP to use for farming, right? So I mean there's lots of harmful chemicals and building materials that can be used, and I don't think that we fully understand what the harm of PFAS is at this point. Those types of things. I don't want people to come into build and to ruin something that's working well in the ag zone. So is there a good way to check those things, or to limit materials that can be used? Is there a good way for that, Eric?
Are you saying limit materials that can be used on the farm or on the construction of the home?
Construction of the home in general. I mean, I'm just going back to thinking about some of the things we talked about with Lake Auburn, with like low impact development. It would be different for farms, but I mean, those types of things, I guess.
Yeah, I think, homes could be subject to a standard like we use in watersheds most at risk, like Lake Auburn, if you wanted to. I think farms have an outsized impact, I think, compared to a home as far as stormwater runoff, or potentially do in some cases. But if you wanted a stormwater standard in there for the house, we could certainly look at something similar to what we do in the Lake Auburn watershed.
So is
And
that, are you asking staff to draft something and potentially put it in the text amendment? Is that what you're asking?
I think that it would probably be most clean outside of a zone change. But I think it's something that if we're going to open up for any type of building, I think that it's something that should happen pretty soon after a zone change, so that we're ready for whatever types of buildings we're going to have.
I guess just to elaborate a little bit, Dana, when I think about the definition of resource protection, I think about wetlands, and I think about floodplains in particular. And I think if you think of the history of the ag zone / RP, the resource protection areas, I know that a lot of the original zoning was created along the river was because it was in the floodplain. So those are the resource protection areas. There's already standards in place that should limit the building in the, if we look at the true definition of a resource protection area, we shouldn't be building buildings in wetlands. And I think that Evan did a really good job identifying those. We shouldn't be building buildings in floodplains. Those, we should revisit that, make sure that there's some strong language in here. I think there's still an opportunity to do it in this piece, particularly if we look at and we concentrate on true resource protection areas, these areas that are critical habitat for wading birds. That's another one that is under the IFNW piece. Critical habitat for deer wintering areas. Again, these are all pieces that we could add into what we consider resource protection and should be part of the criteria. I think that Evan tried to do a good job of identifying those locations, and that's part of the staff process to kind of go through that and to approve these house lots.
Yeah, John, I like where you're going with that. I also want to make sure that we reduce contaminants that are introduced by construction. So those types of things, I think, in general, I'm not environmental scientist. I don't know exactly what happens there when you add things to soils, but I don't want anything bad to happen.
So can I ask a question to that, Dana? Do we currently, or staff might know this, do we currently evaluate farmland and any pesticides and chemicals that they use in an ag zone for farming or any other ag approved uses, right? So are we currently monitoring that current day?
No. We
No.
do look at during housing construction, though, that they're using erosion and sediment control best management practices, and there are regulations to require setbacks from streams and other resources.
And I guess to go, Stacy, to elaborate on your question directly, an active farm, if it participates in any of under the federal programs, under the Natural Resources Conservation Service or the Department of Ag, again, going back to the mayor's $2,000, they qualify for these programs. They do have nutrient management plans that address that and impose best management practice to treat, say, animal waste or tilling up agricultural land and things like that. They actually have a great program, a CRP program that sets land aside for specific items that help critical habitat and wildlife and things like that, that the farmer actually gets paid for. So there is some programs, there is some things there that are out there for active farmers to address some of the concerns that the counselor was getting at.
Anyone else have any other thoughts? Again, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, just real quick, just circling back to something we covered earlier in the meeting. I guess I'd like a clearer definition of reasonably available and a more clear definition and priority list on what's most important in regards to the marsh, farm, forest, so on and so forth.
Like that. Excellent.
So we have about 3 minutes left till 7 o'clock. That's when our normal city council meeting starts. That doesn't mean this is a hard stop. So we very easily can call the city council meeting to order, continue this workshop, if everybody agrees, or at least the majority of you agree, for another 30 minutes into, past 7 o'clock. That way we can make sure that we fully vet out our questions. Everything we're talked about. If there's anything else that needs to be done, we should do this to standard and not to time. And then what we'll do is we'll go back in and start that public discussion and our normal council meeting. But I want to, as we're coming up to 3 minutes to 7, I just want to throw that out there. Is there consensus? Do you want to continue working on the workshop, for another 30 minutes? Is there any more that you have?
I just have a quick question. So this process, and then it goes to city council. You guys, no.
It's going to go. Staff, you want to take it up?
Yeah, we're going to take the feedback we heard tonight and update this draft to reflect some of the changes that have been asked for, hopefully all of them. And then that draft will go to planning board for a public hearing before it comes back to council for 2 readings and a public hearing. So I think we have a lot to work with from what we've received from the discussion tonight. If we are going to prioritize those resources over one another, it would be helpful to have a little bit more discussion about that.
So you're asking for a little bit more discussion on okay. So council planning board, do you want to continue this conversation for a period of time past 7? Is there any objections to that? None being, if you have to go back to work or do something, please go. Okay. And it just stinks, but we're all kind of volunteering here. If not, okay, then let's keep running through it. I'll call the meeting in order in 2 minutes. Manager, good? Okay.
What? Yeah, well, so just from a clarifying standpoint, what I'm hearing is someone's alarm just went off. It's okay. So what I'm hearing is the next steps for us, we are going to talk to staff about prioritizing some of the recommendations, correct? That we had put forward.
Specifically, which resources are wetlands more important than prime soils, just so we can get those in the right order.
Sure.
In the final draft.
So at this time, I'd like to call to order the April 18th regular city council meeting at 7 o'clock. Please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. And for those who are joining, what we're doing is we're just going to continue. We have a couple more items to address for the joint planning board and city council workshop. So we're going to lead off with Eric Cousins. Mr. Cousins, if you want to try to facilitate the resource protection order of importance.
So I think right now you can see the order on page 6 of 10 of the city attorney draft. I'll go to that here. We have soils of statewide significance and prime soils as the first listed. So the first one, and these were not listed in any priority order, but unless there's a disagreement with this order being the priority, I guess that's what we'd look for feedback on. Soils of statewide significance or prime farmland. The next one is essential habitat defined by the state of Maine, Department of Inland Fisheries and Wildlife. John mentioned wading bird habitat. They have maps that include wading bird habitat, eagle's nest, deer wintering areas.
I'm sorry, is it possible to put that up there?
That is up there. So the number 1 is avoid being sited on soils of state significance. It's a long-winded list, I guess, with quite a bit of description. But number 2 is the essential habitat. 3 is wetlands. 4 is slopes. There is an outright prohibition on this option for housing in the Lake Auburn watershed portions, which I think was very intentional. That's certainly the most protective on the list.
And Eric, I would argue that should be number 1. That's
Yeah, which one?
That the property not be located in the Lake Auburn watershed overlay.
Yep, we can move that to number 1. That's the only one that doesn't have any room for consideration of alternatives.
But is it, and I'm sorry, I mean, I look at these as all equally, important, the requirements. Is just the listing of them, does it assume some sort of prioritization?
It doesn't currently, but the counselor was suggesting that maybe there would be some discussion about that, and we're happy to do that. We just want to make sure we prioritize them the way that you would like, the order that you would like.
Yeah, I just thought it could use some clarity when you use the terminology reasonably available. Okay, you don't have the required
That's
2
what I
acres
thought.
within a lot. Okay, what's most important? What's that threshold? What's staff's guidance going to be in regards to allowing approval and moving forward?
But before,
And I think it's easier when you have a lot that's affected by one of these. Where it gets a little more complicated is when you're trying to prioritize one against the other.
Evan, did you have something?
yeah, before we go too much further, there was a question, David asked a question earlier about things that had been removed. So this is also a section where something is not the same. The staff attorney draft has avoid soils of significance and essential habitat, but removed the not being cited on portions of a lot that are currently forested. So I just say that because we had actually talked, that was part of the discussion that we actually had earlier. And since that was part of our earlier discussion, I'm just bringing that up to say, did we have that because we wanted that, or are we recognizing that it's not here, we want it back or not? But
I can go back to the planning board version if that helps.
I don't know what everyone else's desire would be. Obviously, I want it in there. I wrote the draft, so that doesn't mean everyone else does.
Yeah, Eric, would you mind going back to Evan's draft and checking it out?
Was that part covered by the tree growth tax law program? Or I understand that it was slightly different.
No, it was in this huge list of things to avoid. Avoid being sited on land that is currently forested unless it can be demonstrated, in this case probably to the code enforcement officer, that non-forested land is not recently available within the buildable area. So it was a prohibition similar to the soils and habitat.
So number 3 here is that text. Avoid being sited on land that is currently forested unless it can be demonstrated to the planning department that non-forested land is not reasonably available.
So Evan, you're saying that that was something you suggested, and I'm hearing that Sally, you potentially took that out.
I defer to John on this one.
I took that one out.
It's all Sally's fault. You said that in the very beginning.
I certainly took that out. Again, not intentional to delete it, but the thought process is a lot of these vacant lots are probably 100% forested unless they're being managed. To me, that doesn't seem like a viable reason. I don't know if there's no, if we're looking at 20% of that lot, if it's 10 acres, we're looking at 2 acres of impacting that forested area. So it's not a significant thing that would impact the rural area.
Yeah, I mean, I think forested here could be a noun or a verb. I mean, was your intent forested as an actively being forested in a forest management plan, or just trees?
Trees.
Just trees, okay.
Again, intent, because we heard from the public that
It's
we
interesting
needed to
because,
protect the trees, so
Yeah.
that's why that was there.
well, right now, if someone comes in with a 300-acre lot and they want to do an agricultural activity, 78%, I believe, of all the agricultural zone is forested. But they can, right now, they can clear cut all of it in order to do whatever they want. So that's ultimately allowed under current ordinances. So, I mean, I don't think I just don't see scenarios. I actually think this is kind of productive, frankly, from what I'm hearing from constituents, because we probably want them to clear some trees to build a house on 20% of the lot and not site it and not, do it on their active hayfield, okay, or open pasture land. So this is, probably, a better to be eliminated, if you would. I know what your intent is. And I think I can appreciate. We all can appreciate intent, but I think it backfire. Have some unintended consequences.
Yeah, I guess I would slightly disagree in the fact that, I mean, if you're picking, why would you prioritize a hayfield or put a house there versus not being able to? So if it's actively forested, then by leaving the language in there, we're encouraging them to pick a different spot.
Well, that's the difference between, is it covered in trees or is it being forested? Is it under a forest management program? That's the difference. I mean, I agree in the edited version that if it's enrolled in the state forestry program or there is an active forest management plan versus if it just has trees on it. It's covered in forest, if you would. So I think that's the difference in the definition. Forested versus actively being forested and harvested.
But you can be harvesting and foresting without being in the plan. Yes, I do it.
So I'm sorry, I didn't understand the question. What did
You said that basically foresting. It's not just a forest of trees. It's you're acting
Right.
in an active manner to harvest the lot. You can do that without being enrolled in a plan.
Oh, no,
And I think
absolutely,
we're
yeah.
trying to identify that if you're actively harvesting, that should also be considered. And
I don't agree with that. I think that, if anything, you default out to the state program, the tree growth program. But I agree. I mean, that's why I don't like 3, because you can be forestry or not, and one day you clear all the land, you make money off the timber harvest. Now you want to build your home there. I don't think that should be prohibited.
So people would then, I guess, enroll in the program and potentially decrease the amount of revenue being generated by the city for that lot, sort of as an unintended consequence. Okay.
Is there a reason to change the order of these environmental standards? We can certainly move the Lake Auburn one to the top because that's been a very hot topic recently. It's the only one that's an outright prohibition here on the environmental side. Is there any reason to prioritize wetland slopes or habitat over prime soils? Just looking for any changes here if you wanted, or we don't have to prioritize.
I think slopes should be
try to balance.
the lowest priority. I think slopes should be the lowest.
I agree.
I mean, anything that falls under any regulatory body, your inland fisheries, your farm bureau, anything that's designated, that's got to be high priority because you can't do anything with that. Wetlands, it's designated wetlands, you can't do anything in it anyway, so that should be, it's moot.
There's other regulations that already applied to those.
We should have an overlay of stuff that's already prohibited. We don't have to prohibit things that are already prohibited.
Well, I mean, building a wetland isn't necessarily prohibited. It's just prohibitive to do it.
It's limited, but
you can impact 4,300 square feet without a permit. But I guess to prioritize these is I don't know, I don't know if there's real value to that. I think it should be all considered in the development of the lot. I think we really, other than the Lake Auburn watershed, it should be all considered. If we're truly looking at 10-acre lots, and we can't find 20% that's available to construct without impacting that area, it's probably not a good lot. It's really not it doesn't have good possibility. It shouldn't be a residential lot to begin with. But I think we should be able to find a buildable area in that defined lot by taking all these in consideration with equal value, that we're giving all of this stuff importance. And I think that was the spirit of the ag resource protection, was to take a look at some of these things and to protect those special areas that are important to the citizens of Auburn. So I have a hard time with that as a staff person. I think I would have a hard time with that. And we would try to avoid these at all possible. I would like to sit down with each individual landowner and figure it out. That's part of our responsibility and our job, is to work with the landowner to whatever they want to do with the land. Let's try to help them figure it out and sit down, go over the overlays, and figure out what's the best way to protect the resource, but at the same time deliver whatever the individual landowner wants.
I agree with that.
What's currently encumbering you from doing that?
The information that's available to us, we have probably, in my opinion, we have probably some of the best GIS information that any one individual city has and has accessible to. And it's forward facing to the public. I think it's a wonderful asset to this community. And it's there. I think we can start utilizing that information. We spent a lot of time with the SNRB board collecting this information and making sure that that's a consideration for the development. If we're looking away at getting rid of the income standard and having the ability to build a home, we still have all these things that we talked about with the board that is available to us as a resource. And we shared those layers with you, with the planning board. It may have been prior to you coming on board, but we have all the layers available now today.
I like that.
John, when you were talking about this, you were saying the 20% building envelope, but the way the language is written is the residential dwelling being cited. So I guess when I'm reading this, I'm not reading this as the 20% residential use envelope has to avoid all those things. It's the house itself not being on those. And if that's the case, should we also amend this to not just the dwelling, but the dwelling and other impervious services? So that way you're catching things like driveways, sheds, things like that.
Yeah, and that was how I was interpreting that as well. I think we're on the same page there.
We can add some clarity to that.
Yeah, that's why
Thank
we're
you.
going to
I like
define it.
Okay, great, super.
Sally, a question, and just as a point of reference, in your experience, and I'll default out to staff as well, what have other municipalities of our size, or even smaller, any municipalities of Maine, done to replace our income standard with something else to promote farming?
I don't know of any other community in Maine that has an income standard, but I mean, I think it's used in Oregon, they have an income standard. It's quite frankly part of the farmland program, itself. So much lower standard, different standard, but most communities deal with, I think Unity and Fairfield, they have, they do it through like a minimum, lot size and.
Like 10-acre minimum lot size?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And then, if you have some sort of less intensive agricultural use, you might have a lower minimum lot size. But for the more intensive, you have a higher minimum lot size.
And right now, agriculture is actually authorized in all zones of the city, if I remember, except for commercial or industrial.
Almost all.
Almost
Yeah.
all.
There's some
So-
limitations in some zones. but
Right.
Some form of agriculture is allowed in every
Okay,
zone.
so that was that. Look at that. So there has been no replacement of an income standard in Maine because they probably haven't existed.
Right, it doesn't.
Yeah, I don't think
We
there's
don't have
another one.
lots of other models to look to, quite frankly, at least in the state of Maine. I mean, there are
That's what I
other
was just trying to get some,
yeah,
you know,
yeah.
opinions on
Yeah.
what other communities have done, especially communities that, you know, have successful farming and lots of it, and then, you know, what have they done to promote? So, okay, thank you.
Yeah, well, I can share from a planning board perspective. When we were reviewing this, that came front and center, and I think that really drove us to say, okay, let's remove this, but let's replace it, right? We'll with still keeping the intent in place, because it's becoming, you know, it's getting in line with other cities, other standards. So.
All right, if we're, you know, good, we're in the council portion. Is there any last questions, or staff? Last questions here, Ryan?
As this progresses on, what is the plan for communication with the public?
So the next step in an official process, I mean, we're already beyond the date that we were given from the council to have a recommendation back through the planning board. The next step is to take this feedback. We've continued to communicate in forums like this throughout the discussion. The next step will be to advertise a public hearing for, I believe it's the May 9th planning board meeting is the second Tuesday, and that'll be advertised in the newspaper. We can push out some notifications via social media and the city's website. The draft will be available at least 2 weeks before that meeting on the city's website and at City Hall, and then we would encourage people to participate in that hearing on the 9th. And then it'll come back to council for 2 more public meetings, and one of those is a true public hearing.
Thank you.
Okay, at this point, we're going to, oh, sorry, Karen.
Can I clarify a point on, when you're saying, same section, your list, enrolled in the State of Maine Tree Growth Program, and then the 10-year requirement was struck out. That's correct, right? Okay.
Yeah, this version still has it in, but in the latest version, it's out.
It's, the 10 years is out.
Yep.
But it still says enrolled in the State of Maine Tax Tree Growth Program. Can you have clarification on that, so that, again, applications come in. For me, I'm reading that application, I'm saying this homeowner is putting their land in the tree growth program. Now, that may include that 1 or 2 acre parcel that is listed on the application as non-tree growth area. So it's not a mixed wood, it's not a softwood, it's not a hardwood, but it's on that application. So does that mean that that piece is enrolled because it's on that application? So can there be clarity on that?
Yeah, I mean, it says not cited on a portion of a parcel that is enrolled. So you'd have to build the house on the portion of the lot that's not in the program.
So you're saying that
Yeah.
even though it's on the application, it's not in the program? Because that piece is on the application, it's just,
But
it's just being assessed as ag.
the
because
residential-
It's not a mixed wood, hardwood, or softwood.
the residential use can't be cited in the portion that's part of that program.
We can work on clarifying language,
Yep.
but
I don't know if there's a map that you
yeah,
rely on for
yeah,
the program or not, but
we can make it clear if it's not currently that
I
clear.
think the council and planning board are clear on the intent. So the nuances on whether it's
Right.
listed or not with the state, I think that will definitely like leave that to the professionals. If there's nothing else at this point, what I'd like to do is I'd like to move on our agenda from the workshop. And I'd like if council and planning board could make their way over to council chambers. If everybody in the audience here could just stay seated until everybody leaves. That way, council, planning board, go use the restroom if you need to, but let's be expedient and get to our seats so we can continue with the public discussion. Thank you very much. And thank you, Sally and Karen and staff. I appreciate it. Auburn. He's past planning board chair from 1992 to 95. I did a lot for the city, and he just recently passed away. So if you could please join me in that moment of silence. Thank you very much. Okay. Okay, so we're going to be moving on in the agenda, and I am going to move the order of the agenda so that we have public comment, our first public comment. That will happen now. So if anybody would like to speak about any item that is not on tonight's city council agenda, that means if you'd like to speak about the workshop, you're more than willing. Please approach the podium. Give us your name and address and limit your comments to 3 minutes. Thank you.
My name's Jane Costlow, and I live at 104 4th Street in Auburn. And I have just finished my term as chair of the SNRB. I will try to do this in 3 minutes. It will be a challenge. I found it very interesting that we just listened to a long discussion that talked a lot about intent, and the intent of the proposal before us and the intent of owners in the ag zone. I want to remind you of what the intent of the ag zone is. The intent of the ag zone is not to be a residential zone, but you seem to have collectively decided that it is to become a residential zone rather than to serve as a conservation for the conservation of natural resources and open space land, and to encourage agriculture, forestry, and certain types of recreational use. I'm just pointing that out to you, and everything that you just talked about is simply about building houses. So if you decide you want to do that, why don't you just change the purpose? And let's not lie to ourselves. The zone was created in order to prevent sprawl. The question that the mayor, I believe, directed at Ms. Scammon about how other municipalities have dealt with ending income standards was, I thought, a bit disingenuous. We are the only municipality, perhaps certainly in the state of Maine, that has had an income requirement. We are also, do you realize how much open land, undeveloped land we have in the city of Auburn, and how imperiled that is in southern Maine? Let us not think that this is useless land, or that these are just trees, or that the wetlands are not doing work that is really important for us. There's something now called ecosystem services, and it's a way of calculating the monetary value of trees and wetlands and wildlife and open space. And I suggest that rather than sitting around trying to decide what's more valuable, wetland or trees, which seems to me a completely stupid exercise, why don't you ask some professionals about what the ecosystem services of almost 20,000 acres of undeveloped land are? I heard someone say just a couple of days ago that Auburn is an almost perfectly organized municipality. We have at the center a density of residential areas, and then moving out from there we have less dense residences, more residential, and finally we have the ag zone and forestry and forests. And that person said that those areas of the ag zone are our lungs. They help us breathe. My friends, I don't think that anybody in this room is not aware that we live at a moment of environmental crisis.
Thank you very much, ma'am. Your 3 minutes is up.
When we need to be extremely careful about developing in ways that are going to intensify our use of fossil fuels, and also along the way raise the taxes of Auburn citizens.
Thank you very much, ma'am. Ma'am, your time is up.
I was told by the city staff that I could have a few more minutes, and I'm going to take 1 more minute.
Ma'am.
There have been so many good
that won't happen in this
ideas
meeting.
floated about how to deal with the ag zone and move beyond the income requirement. There are great ideas out there. And I suggest that what we need now is a different process. We can keep having workshops like this in which most of the people who live in the zone and Auburn citizens don't get to bring their ideas to the table, or we could shift to a very different kind of model of deliberation on this really, really, really important issue. So I say, take a look at the Good Food Council recommendation for a different kind of process, and let's try to operate from good faith and goodwill towards each other and think about the intentions and the purpose of the ag zone.
Everybody at the podium, name and address, and limit your comments to approximately 3 minutes. Thank you, sir. Continue.
My name is Les Bosworth. I own a farm in 299 Jordan School Road. I started when I was 30, I'm 84. And I didn't know how to spell zoning when I moved here. Didn't know anything about it, about the farm. But I think the whole bunch of you are missing the boat. What you're talking about, the people who owned that land when it was zoned, that's when you cut their throat. You put it in zoning that they couldn't do anything with it. They're all dead. People that have bought it now have bought it under those conditions. And they should have realized when they were buying it what they were buying. And I think you're just giving up the best resource in the Northeast. No other city has this resource, and you're not even discussing that. You're just discussing how we can bust it up. I think it's time you really looked at it and see what a valuable resource you got there. I got 200 acres. I've got probably 2,000 to 3,000 feet of road frontage. You can change that tomorrow morning, and you'll just tax me off the land, that's all. I think you're looking at it from the wrong direction. I think the only ones that are hounding to really develop this land are lawyers, developers, and some people involved in city government. And that's all I got to say.
My name is Dennis Wheeler, and my family has owned a corner of the Jordan School Road and the River Road since we was before a state. James Wagg fought in the Revolutionary War. He was given 100 acres, and he settled going up the Androscoggin River, and he settled in South Auburn. I still own a piece that's just over in the Aggie zone, and the last thing my mother said, and she was a Wag, is come home. And right now, my wife and I are trying to get her permission to build a retirement there on that. There's 2 houses between the River Road and my piece of property that my mother gave me. I've seen Eric. I've been in the process now for about 3 years getting this done, and I'm asking this board for help. I just want to come back home and retire where I was brought up. I lived there my whole life. You know, I mean, yes, it was a farm at one time when I was growing up, but it has not been an agricultural farm for the last 50, 60 years since I grew up there. And I just want to come back and build a retirement home on the Jordan School Road. It's been in my family since we was before Maine. When we was in Massachusetts, it was given to my family. And I still today can't build a retirement home there. And I don't understand why. I lived here my whole life. I'm almost 70 years old. I went to EL High School probably with some of you guys. I just don't see how we can come through this. You know, it's a simple thing for me. Go home where I grew up and retire. I don't know which way to turn other than turning to you guys. I've tried, and Eric has tried for me. It's just not happening. If you guys have any suggestions of which is my route next, I'd be more than happy to hear. But right now, I am at a standstill, and it's been this way for about 4 or 5 years now, that I've tried to get a homestead built on this. It's 2 acres of land, but it's been in my family forever, and the rest of the stuff is still in my brother's, some of my brother's name, and then a lot of it is gone. So that's what I have to say, and hopefully the group will listen to me, and understand where we're coming from. So please help in anything that you can do for us to build our home on that land that I've had in my family since before we was a state. Okay? Thank you.
Just so everybody realizes, if there's any questions coming to the board, we can't answer them, obviously,
Okay.
during this session.
Sure.
But I would encourage you to follow up with staff and/or your counselor, myself, after the meeting, okay, for specifics.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
Can I just add to what he just said? Yeah, my name is Joanne Wheeler, and I'm his wife for 35 years, and I'm a little nervous. Our land was gifted to us in 1987, so we've had it for 35 years. And his mother worked in every shoe factory in this city, and she was even, as a young teenager, when the Depression came, she was forced to go out of state to work in shoe factories and send the money home to her family to maintain that farm, because they couldn't maintain it as a farm years ago. And they ended up selling some of the land to Bell's Farms, which is a farm. A farm should stay farms. But 2 acres, it's not a farm. We should be able to build there. I believe that, but that's up to you, and we respect that you're trying to make this happen and make this change happen. We respect that, and we thank you for that. We understand that there's a lot of diversities and a lot of feelings, but we do count. Our feelings matter, too. So, thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
David Griswold, 199 Gamage Avenue. I'm here to speak as a woodlot owner. I own a woodlot in Maine, but not in Auburn. But I've dealt with hundreds of landowners and loggers over my career and through my association with Tree Farm and the Sustainable Forestry Initiative. I'm here to tell you first that I disagree with the idea that the only woodlots that's significant is one that has a management plan. Maine woodlot owners' surveys have shown that the vast majority of landowners do not own their land to harvest timber. They own it for privacy, wildlife, and what have you, and that needs to be recognized. My main point that I came here to mention to you is that if there is development within or adjacent to woodlots, it's going to create conflicts between neighbors. A landowner that's bought his woodlot for privacy is going to lose it if he has houses on his property line. You know, he might want to manage wildlife, but the folks next door will think wildlife are great until they eat their garden or a coyote gets their cat. I have 2 friends that live in a cul-de-sac that backs up into the woods that have both gotten Lyme disease because of the proximity to the deer. Public access is really important to Maine, and if I was a landowner that was allowing hunting on my land and there were houses adjacent to my property line, I would feel obligated to post the land so that there wouldn't be safety issues to the neighbors and liability to me. This happens more often than you think. When my son was skiing in the 90s, for the middle school team, Snorada, where the ski trails were, had to relocate. We had stuff put together around the middle school, and both those had to change. We wound up at Lost Valley. That's why ANSA is at Lost Valley right now. The other thing that you run into if you're a woodlot owner with neighbors is it's going to be difficult to harvest, because the neighbors are going to object to the noise of the equipment, and they're going to struggle with changes in their view once your lot is cut, and they're particularly going to object to nighttime operations during mud season, where you have to operate and haul wood only on frozen roads. So that creates issues that I've talked to. And if you think neighbors aren't concerned about harvest, remember what happened at the East Auburn school harvest back in 2013. There was a moratorium that was placed by the council on harvesting public woodlots.
And
in
sir,
Maine?
thank you very much.
Just
You've
one
already
more.
gone over well over 3 minutes. I'm trying to be polite, but we have to keep it, or else we won't be able to accomplish and give everyone a chance. So it's you'll have other meetings to speak, sir.
I want to wrap up by saying we need to
Sir.
balance housing and conservation and ag values, and I hope the council and the planning board will find a way to do that. Thank you.
Next person, please come on up.
Good evening, all. My name is Chloe Myers. My husband Grant and I started Open Heart Farm at 304 Soper's Mill here in Auburn. We currently live on Shawmut Street in Lewiston, though. I'm a 29-year-old small-scale farmer and steward of the land. I'm originally from New York. We moved here just over a year ago and married here in last August. After searching for about 5 years in 4 different states, we found our dream farmland here in Auburn. From the beginning, the community of farmers, neighbors, and local business owners welcomed us with great warmth and enthusiasm. We hope to provide our community with fresh, locally grown, nutritious food, as well as access to farming and nutrition education. My husband Grant has a formal education in ecotourism, and I have a formal education as a nutritional therapist. Open Heart Farm has a lot of views for diversifying the services that we offer our community members here in Auburn. As recent buyers of land in the ag zone, we know all too well the costs associated to bringing services to a rural property in order to make it livable. The cost of the property, along with the utility services, is nearing $250,000. That is not including any housing or farm structures. It will take us years to build a home, but our farm will continue to integrate and grow while we build it. As a farmer and community member, it is in my vested interest to encourage council to consider the value and the future of food production within Auburn. What are our economical values moving forward as we seek to grow as a city? Do these visions include fresh, locally produced food? Or do they further limit access to essential resources that all humans need? Maine and the rest of our great nation cannot continue to rely on produce from California to sustain us forever. Furthermore, I urge Council to work collaboratively with not only the Sustainability and Natural Resources Board, but entities like the Good Food Council of Lewiston and Auburn, and other community organizations who support the public voice on the future of land use, viability of food production, and natural resource protection. Thank you so much for all of the hard work you do. Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Peter Moore. I'm a landowner on the Jordan School Road and the Pownell Road. I've got a different perspective than most of those that have been shared this evening. I see the opportunity here for Auburn to have a much, much bigger future. And I think it's rather closed-minded to think that somehow the agriculture and resource protection zone is the only type of land around. If there was some regional planning where Auburn was collaborating with communities in the region, there'd be more opportunity to concentrate the urban core of Auburn with the kind of services that a regional business hub should be providing, and not have other towns expect that they need to do those same things. So for instance, just to put it in context, New York City, the Manhattan Island is a little over 14,000 acres. We've got 37,000 plus acres of land area, excluding the lakes here in Auburn. Manhattan Island's got 1.8 million people. We have 28,000 people here. I think we can do a few more things in the city of Auburn and still protect the vast majority of this city without the fear-mongering that goes with people thinking that the right to have somebody, to give the right to somebody to live on their land is somehow a deplorable kind of activity. I think it's just atrocious that people are standing up here and don't want people to live on their own bloody land. We have plenty of land. What we have in Auburn is we have a tax problem. We have one of the highest tax rates in the state because we have too small a population and we're trying to act like we're a city. We're a city chartered municipality. We ought to behave like a city. And we ought to allow more development. Doesn't have to be gobbling up all the ag land, But I see the future of Auburn as being a robust urban place that could well surpass the city of Portland and then some, in population, in vitality, in proximity to so many other natural resources. And if we just unleash the creativity and innovation of our citizens and people that own land and property and businesses here, we could see this city thrive for decades to come. But right now, we've got our heads in the sand, we're clinging to the past, and it's time that we stop that. And so I implore you to get rid of this bloody ordinance and not replace it with so many restrictions that we're just back to the same thing we are, same way we started back in 1963 when this ordinance was enacted. Thank you.
Michael Morrissey, 825 Perkins Ridge Road, Auburn. I'd just like to draw your attention to according to this agenda, we were supposed to talk about the residential strips. We didn't talk about that, or you all didn't talk about that. And I just want to bring that acknowledgement and like to ask, when do you plan on addressing that? At what point are we going to address it, or is it done? Are you not going to address it? Thank you very much.
I'm going to comment on that. We are going to address it at a later point in time after planning board has continued work. So there'll be, and it's not a foregone conclusion by any means. So this was just the ag resource protection zone was such a large topic. We couldn't get to that in a timely manner. So we will have another opportunity to.
All right, can materials reflect accurately what's going to be discussed in the future?
We always try our best. Thank you. Is there anybody here for the first public open session? If not, I'm going to close it. I've now closed this public session. We're going to be moving on to the agenda. There is a second public session for items that are not on tonight's agenda later on in the meeting. We have two consent items on the agenda tonight. I'll entertain a motion.
So moved.
Motion to accept.
Second.
I got a motion from Councilor Walker, and I got a second from Councilor Staples. Show of hands, all those in favor? Passes 7-0. Next are the minutes of the April 3rd, 2023 regular city council meeting. Are there any corrections to the minutes?
Motion to approve is written.
Second.
Councilor Staples, second by Councilor Milks. All those in favor? Okay. Opposed? I'm sorry, I didn't see that. Passes 7-0. Moving on, communications. We got a couple communications that are in your packet, namely from the Lake Auburn Watershed Protection Commission and a communication from the City of Auburn as, to intervene with the PUC. Please look at that if you haven't. And we also have council communication. I'm going to lead off tonight with a couple short things. First, I am calling a special workshop at on April 24th. That's next Monday. Purpose of the workshop is for budgetary discussions. Okay, the city manager will be able to propose a budget, present it. We'll be able to have some detailed discussion. I would like to, before making a final call, 5 o'clock. Does 5 o'clock work for the council? 5:30? Better than 5?
5:30 be better.
Okay, we'll keep it at 5:30. Okay, so 5:30 special council meeting / workshop. Second, under communication, on my end, that is it. I'm going to go to the council, then the manager. So, Councilor Staples.
Yeah. So I nothing at this time.
Just right down the row.
Wanted to let the public know that Jerry Dennison and I will be leading a walk. It's called the Jane's Walk. There's about 37 of them around the state. It's named after some radical lady named Jane who stopped a highway from being built in her town. Maine Preservation and the Maine Office of Tourism are sponsoring this. So Jerry Dennison and I will walk around New Auburn, 9 o'clock on May 6th, same day as the Lobster Fest. And the more I ask Jerry, the more he gives me, and then gives me more. He's just a wealth of knowledge about New Auburn. So, come down, and we're going to meet at Raleigh's, 9 o'clock, in that area. and then sort of circumnavigate over towards the river, and then up, I think, 2nd Street, up by the church, and then back over to Barker Mill, where they're going to do goodies for us when we're done.
That's great. Awesome. I actually would like to be there for that. Councilor Gary? Okay. Mr. Manager?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. You mentioned the budget. I appreciate you setting the special workshop for the budget. We were going to speak on the budget tonight, but with this pressing issue, we moved it to the special meeting. All the budget documents are on the website, so if you'd like to go to the website and go under the budget tab, you will see the city's manager's proposed budget, the CIP for FY24, and also the CIP 5-year plan is also included. So, council members, you should have your budget books in your office, and so encourage you to take a look at those before our workshop. Thanks.
Very good. Okay.
Point of order. So the budget portal is currently not working. Could you take a look at that?
So we were on that earlier today. It appears to be a link broken, and so they're working with them tonight on that.
Thanks.
Okay. We already had the first open session of the night, so we're going to move on to new business, which is first, we have an order 50-04182023, which is adopting the 5-year capital improvement plan. Do I have a motion?
Motion to accept.
Second.
Motion, Councilor Walker, second from Councilor Whiting. Open this up to the public for comment. Is there anybody in the public that would like to comment on our 5-year capital improvement plan? None being, I'll bring this back to the council. Council, and everybody at home too, of course, this is just a kind of foreshadowing, if you would, of the next 5 years' potential CIP budget. And it's in our agenda packet, so we'll start from there. Is there any discussion, debates, amendments?
So I would just say that looking out next year, it's a little scary to see that $25 million line item for a public works and public safety facility. I understand it's needed. I hope that we can find another way than to bond it over 2 years. So it's good to see an amount there, but I'm looking forward to some other solutions that might lower that number.
Again, this is all the 5-year CIP. Further on the agenda, we'll be talking about the final CIP, not in tonight's agenda, I'm sorry, but in a future CIP when we actually authorize the 2023-24 CIP. Is there any amendments to this plan? None being, I'm going to actually ask for a vote. And remember, it's non-binding. I want to stress this enough. We are not committing the city to this level of purchasing over the next 5 years. This is just guidance. All those in favor of the 5-year CIP proposal, please raise your hand. Keep them up. Keep them up. 6. All those opposed? Okay, passes 6-1. Next is Order 51-04182023, allocating funds from the American Rescue Plan Act, ARPA, to establish the Auburn Victory Garden Program. Do I have a motion?
So moved.
Councilor Hawes, second.
Second.
Councilor Staples. I'll now open this up to the public for comment. For those of you who might not have heard, and Mr. Holmes, please make your way up here too. I kind of came up with this proposal to encourage small front yard, backyard garden programs. Thank you to staff very much for kind of working this into something that's actually more than just intent, but actual actionable product. Basically $150 in a grant voucher program, and I'll let you pick it up and discuss from there.
So our intention is to try to simplify this as much as possible, make it easy for everyone, as far as staff and the people that would be using this program, is we would look to work with local vendors, stores that would accept vouchers from the city. So basically someone would come in, they'd make the application, as long as they meet the criteria, they'd get a voucher, they could go to the store and be able to pick up the material to buy some chickens, buy some seeds, buy some compost, whatever it is they want to do. And that would be the end of it. The vendor would then send back, be reimbursed, and that would be our tracking for the system.
And, I looked at the application, thank you for including that. I mean, a couple of those things, if you look at secondary and tertiary goals here, is being able to track what type of agricultural produce a backyard garden's making and where they are. There's a lot we can develop in GIS, from heat mapping, where there's high concentration of locally sourced food, where we might have a dearth of locally produced food, and what kind of specific programs we can implement later on to help people have freshly and localized, hyper-local, backyard gardens to supplement their sustenance. So this also matches up with our comp plan, and talking about the agricultural portion of the comp plan as well, which encourages this type of program. Is there any debate?
Just one thing. So I like the intent here. So one of the things that kind of jumped out at me is to provide vouchers. Do you have places in mind that might be doing this already? To me, it looks like, it's really easy to go and spend $150 on flowers, and I don't really think that's going to be the intent here. So.
It's not. We've talked with staff. We've got about, right now, I think 4 businesses that we believe they primarily sell these types of products that would work well. And on the voucher, it would, kind of state some of the limitations of what they couldn't purchase probably. But we haven't reached out to those businesses. I want to make sure this passed tonight before I reached out to anybody. I don't want to get anybody's hopes up and take something away that we might have offered.
Would somebody using community gardens be able to use these vouchers?
As long as they fill out the application and qualify for the program, then they would be able to get that voucher and use that to plant seeds down there as well. Sure. Anything else? No?
Oh, Councilor Gary?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I think it's a great opportunity for people to learn how to grow food, and it's great. I've had a rewarding experience when I was able to do it at their Newbury Street Garden. Now, when you talk about criteria, are they going to have to come in with a plan for what they're going to, like how big their garden's going to be and what they're going to buy? Or are we just going to say, okay, here's your $150 and go for it?
So our intention is to provide some literature to go with that. We're working with a co-op, with the Maine Cooperative Extension, to provide some of that information. But no, the testing of those questions we felt was going to be very burdensome to try to figure out, at what level would you disqualify somebody because they didn't have the right plan, and that became very cumbersome. So this is really about an honor system. We believe the places we'll pick will be places that you can really only get things that apply to this, and the merchants will have the understanding of what the intent is as well. So hopefully people won't be going in and buying things that don't make sense.
Again, I thank you for your hard work, and I do thank the council if they do support this.
Thank you.
Okay.
Sorry, just one more thing. So I see that the applications will be accepted until August 1st. Can we make these vouchers expire, we'll say, at the end of, August or September, just so that we have a clear understanding of what's been used so that we can put those monies back into the funds that aren't used?
Absolutely, yeah, we can make them expire.
Councilor Gary?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. The good counselor just brought up a point that he said they have to spend it by August?
We would have them available till August.
Okay, because the growing season's earlier than that, so they're gonna have to get the money earlier, and they should be able to spend it before. You gotta have at least 90 days.
So you can get it from now until August 1st.
Right, but after August, that's when you're limited on what you can plant.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Plant a lot of garlic.
A lot of garlic. Councilor Hulse?
So just for clarification, if a person goes out and purchases supplies, then the city has the ability to reimburse them after they've already spent their funds, or we will cut them a check for X amount of dollars.
So they're going to be passed a voucher, and that voucher only can be spent at certain places. And then when they spend it, the merchant will then send that voucher back to the city, and then we'll reimburse the store for that purchase. So the person has no value in that piece of paper until they actually go spend it at the store we've designated that they can spend it at for those products.
Perfect, thank you.
So hypothetically, if I went to you and I said I only have room for 4 tomato plants, and the value that's probably going to be $20, $5 per, huh?
Yeah. If they only want
$5.
20,
Okay,
if they
it's
only want
$5.
$20, they'll get a $20 voucher.
Right, $20. I go over to Small's Greenhouse, plug, okay, over on Summer Street. I go to Small's, give him the voucher, gives me my tomato plants, I plant them on my porch, and then he turns that voucher in to Glenn when he has enough of them, okay, and Glenn cuts him a check.
But it's worth, I mean, you gotta spend more than the $5 for your tomato plants, because you gotta have a certain type of bed that you're gonna put them in, if you're gonna do a raised bed, or if you're gonna do it in pots or milk crates, and you also gotta get the soil just right, and you gotta get the fertilizer and tomato cages or stakes and things to grow. So I know because
You've
of
done
the
it.
cost, yes.
I've
Well,
seen.
on the application, and I'm very happy about this, and because I see my mother, who's a senior, who really struggles to get that garden put together, and her neighbors in Auburn, and I think this is a good program that stimulates local businesses, but I also think it helps put federal tax dollars, the ARPA money, back into people's pockets, and it's a force multiplier. That $150 max can produce $300, $450 worth of produce that can then be bartered or eaten or given away. I think this is community building at its finest. But there is on the application a box where you can check off if you need service and support. Okay, we can collect that information, get it out to, is it the Maine Co-op?
Yeah, Co-op Extension.
To help. I would also encourage, and I have not seen any communication from the Good Food Council of LA or the Sustainability Natural Resource Board on this program. This is in the comprehensive plan, and I would expect that they will, and I'll ask them to, really support this and get out there and help educate people, because that's their mission. So, is there any other comment? None being? I'll ask for a vote. All those in favor? Opposed? Passes 7-0. Moving along. Next is order 50. Negative. Next is order 52-04182023. This is allocating funds from the American Rescue Plan Act to support establishing the Auburn Commercial Agricultural Incentive Program. Do I have a motion?
So, second.
Councilor Gary, second for Councilor Staples. Open this up to the public for comment. Is there anybody in the public that would like to comment? As you're thinking about this, this is another program similar to what we just discussed, except it's geared 5 grants up to $5,000 for the expansion or start of a new commercial agricultural operation. Nobody from the public wants to speak? Glenn, council, bring it back to you all. Glenn, do you want to elaborate before we open up the council?
So this is obviously a larger program. It's $5,000. The intent here is to either help people get started in commercial farming or expand commercial farming. The intent here would be that we've really debated how do we track this, how do we figure out if somebody's doing this. And there is a IRS tax form that needs to be filed when you do farming. And basically the proof will be is this is going to be a forgivable loan. So therefore you'll get a $5,000 forgivable loan. And then at the next year when you file your taxes, you'll send us your K1 and K1, and show that either you've grown your farm or that you started a farm, and then your loan will be forgiven. And again, we've tried to keep this as simple as possible so we're not sending people out to check on people's farms and what's going on.
Council?
I'd just like to comment on, there was a woman that spoke during the open comment about starting a new farm in Auburn, and I just want to, thank the family for coming here. I would hope that they would look into this program as well.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, one other comment that she also mentioned that it might cost somewhere in around $250,000 to get started without even building her home. So I would hope you'd be coming back to us quickly if you felt that you weren't getting applications at the smaller level and the demand was for greater amounts. I don't know what you'll see, but just throwing that out.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Any other comments? Hopefully this time next year we'll have 5 new commercial farms. Councilor Gary?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. This money
More
could
than
also
30.
potentially be used as seed money, couldn't it, to attract more money to help with the development and expansion of their farm?
Absolutely. As long as they're able to make it all work in that 12-month period, we're fine.
Okay, I'll ask for a vote. All those in favor? Opposed? None. Passes 7-0. Next is ordinance 04-041822023. which is amending Chapter 60 of the City Ordinances, Section 60-2, definitions, by adding the definition of conservation cemetery. This is a first reading. Do I have a motion?
Second.
Counselor,
Point of order.
come on now. What did I miss?
Yeah, 03, Order 03.
Oh, that's right. I'm so sorry. Let me. Ordinance 03. Yeah, I'm sorry. Take that back. Next is ordinance. They're both in the same topic. Next is ordinance 03-04-182023, which is amending Chapter 60 of the City Ordinances, Section 60-145B8. Use regulations by changing the lot size requirement for a cemetery from 20 acres to 10 acres if the cemetery is a conservation cemetery. This is the first reading. Do I have a motion?
Second.
Councilor Gary, and second Councilor Staples. I'll open this up to the public for comment. Anybody like to speak about this? Okay, bring it back to the council. Council, any comment?
I'll just say, as my first job as a young boy was to mow every single cemetery in the city and mine it. And I'm glad that this ordinance doesn't require mowing.
Yeah. I have a question, maybe from staff, if I could, on this. This is a change to cemetery density. Again, a change in the ordinance, and we just got done a lengthy workshop, which is fairly clear that there's a lot of speculation or skepticism on the ability for us to change ordinances that may conflict with comp plan. A comp plan clearly states cemeteries have to be 20 acres.
The comp plan says that, or the ordinance does?
Or the ordinance, I'm sorry.
The ordinance does, yeah. So we looked back a long ways to try to understand what is the magic of 20 acres for a cemetery, and my sense is we didn't find an exact adoption. My sense is the city is trying to avoid having small, scattered cemeteries that might require maintenance someday, the mowing that Councilor Staples mentioned. And going through this with Life Forest, you can fit many more graves in a 10-acre conservation cemetery than you can in a 20-acre traditional cemetery. And the reason is that they're small urns or cremains, and plots are as little as 2 by 3 feet, I believe, instead of a traditional plot that's large enough for a casket. So the other side of it is that these are people that are choosing a burial style that is in a forested natural setting. So there is no mowing, there's no maintenance, there's no headstone above the surface. They're GPS located. There may be a tree planted or something like that to mark the spot. But these are cemeteries that allow for more graves than a traditional 20-acre cemetery in a smaller 10-acre footprint, and they don't require long-term maintenance. As we worked through that, staff thought that this was an option that probably wasn't contemplated when we had drafted the ordinance, and it may be an option for people to be buried in a way that doesn't require as much long-term maintenance. And in particular, what the person who organized the petition, Life Forest, who does this out of New Hampshire, they have found that people from all over the country in New England are happy to be buried in New Hampshire. People from Maine don't want to be buried in New Hampshire, so they're looking to offer this in Maine. So.
Actually, can't deny that. Councilor Whiting.
Eric, this wouldn't preclude people from using new methods of, for example, composting. I read about a similar thing to what we see with large animal composting, done in like an aluminum tube with very organic materials and fairly limited environmental impact compared to cremation with use of fuels that are not great for the environment. So this doesn't get into that, does it?
So, yeah, my understanding is we've learned a lot about those processes throughout this discussion, but my understanding is there's only a couple of states in the country that allow for composting of human remains. And one in particular, I think, was Oregon, and they can ship composted remains, but they're just not doing that yet in our region. But I wouldn't be surprised if that comes up over the coming decade.
Just that there's a current LD that's being reviewed right now at the state level. I'm not sure the status of that. I'm not sure if it's come out of committee yet or not. For a city service viewpoint, We currently serve 7 cemeteries within the city, probably close to, if I had to guess, probably over 100 acres. And maintaining those are a challenge. And so this is a good process. This is a good method that provides this type of opportunity, but also does not impact us on city services.
At this point, I'm going to ask for a roll call vote. Oh, I'm sorry. Just, Councilor Hawes.
Yes, thank you. I just had one quick question. No pun intended, it's a morbid question. But if this was to pass, this does not change, like they don't have to move any caskets, any headstones, any things like that. It can be the way it is, uninterrupted and everything.
Correct, on 20-acre lots, and then this would be a new option for future burials if somebody proposes a cemetery like this and the planning board approves it. But a new cemetery would still have to go to planning board review to be a conservation cemetery. But it does not impact any existing grave sites.
Perfect, thank you.
God. Okay, roll call vote, please.
Counselor Staples?
Yes.
Counselor Gary?
Yes.
Counselor Whiting?
Yes.
Counselor Hawes?
Yes.
Counselor Milks?
Yes?
Counselor Moran?
Yes.
Counselor Walker?
Yes.
Passes unanimously, 7-0. Okay, now we're going to move on to the second part of this, which is ordinance 04-04182023, which is amending chapter 60 of the city ordinances, section 60-2. Definitions, by adding the definition of a conservation cemetery. This is a first reading, and do I have a motion?
So moved.
Second.
Staples, second by Walker. Open it up to this public. Anybody would like to speak? And then bring this back to the council. Council, we pretty much discussed this. Everybody good? Any other questions? No? I'll ask for a roll call vote.
Counselor Staples?
Yes.
Counselor Gary?
Yes.
Counselor Whiting?
Yes.
Counselor Hawes?
Yes.
Counselor Milks?
Yes?
Counselor Moran?
Yes.
Counselor Walker?
Yes.
Passes 7-0. Next, Order 53-04182023, authorizing funds for the East Auburn tennis courts. Do I have a motion?
So moved. Second.
Councilor Whiting, second from Councilor Walker. Open this up to the public for a comment. Anybody in the public like to comment on this? None being, anybody on the council play tennis? Fair. Okay, do we have any debate?
Pickleball, isn't
Is
it?
this the,
Oh, yeah.
is this fixing the issue with that, Mr.
Yes,
Mr. Manager?
so I think you're referring to the land and water conservation restrictions. That was a tennis court that was built with funds through that program, federal money to the state. We were not in compliance on land, water conservation, and this was one of those areas. And so bringing this back up to a usable court will bring us back into standards on this site.
And as being in compliance, if I remember correctly, it then makes us eligible to file or apply for additional grants, other types of grants, correct?
That's correct. We might have like a couple more steps that we have to get through, but we are, land, water, and conservation has green lighted us to move forward.
Great, thank you.
Good ROI. Anything else? And I'm sorry, it is pickleball. Or it will be used for both tennis and pickleball. Okay, at this point, I'll ask for, and this is ARPA funds too, by the way. So, all those in favor? Opposed? None being passed 7-0. Next on the agenda is our second open session. We're going to open this up to anybody, members of the public that would like to speak to the council about any issue directly related to city business, which is not on tonight's agenda. A little bit different from before. Members that would like to speak of the audience, please step up to the podium, give us your name, address, and limit your comments to 3 minutes. I see no one coming for a second open session. We're going to move on to reports. First, mayor's report. I would like to say, obviously, the Lobster Festival is a go. I'm not sure if Jim has a commercial, but I'd love to have it played. It's only 30 seconds. It's live. It's out there. May 6, 1 to 7 o'clock. 3 bands. I think it's going to be a great time. I don't think Jim has it. And that's fine. It's on a Saturday. Oh, wait, it's coming.
May is for Mainers. And what's more Maine than lobster? Put them together and you've got the Auburn Lobster Festival. Come out of your winter hibernation and enjoy fun, food, and great music. Food trucks will have creative lobster dishes for sale, or you can buy tickets online for a traditional lobster bake. Maine's finest brewers will help you wash it all down. You've been waiting all winter for this, so join us all at Festival Plaza in Auburn May 6th for the first annual Auburn Lobster Festival, presented by Emerson Toyota.
Heard out. So we're very excited, knock on wood for weather. That's my report, other than, I should say this, the legislature is an ongoing concern. Lots of meetings, a lot of phone calls, very active with the Mayor's Coalition of Maine, looking at this, how do we get better service center support. There's a lot of interesting bills up there. I think it's going to be a fast and furious movement towards the end here with a lot of people doing some heavy lifting. So I'll turn it over to councilors first and then the manager. Anything to report from committees?
Yeah, I would just like to say that I am going to propose that we add $100,000 to our ARPA expenditures in order to give up to 2 grants of $50,000 for new businesses in the downtown to create places for people to go and to eat or congregate or go and spend time outside of their homes. I can work with Glenn on that.
Can you say that again, please, Councilor?
Sure. I want to have $100,000 of ARPA funds to go to 2 $50,000 grants to go towards 2 businesses that are going to add new places for people to go and eat or to spend time outside of their homes. So that could be lots of different things, but in general, you read about these things called third places. So your first place is your home, your second place is your work, your third place is your favorite restaurant, your favorite bar, who knows, something like that. So it could be a lot of different things, but the idea is it's a place to go and spend time. Yeah, so I think we have a few already in the downtown. I'd like to have a few more.
Okay, so what I would recommend is that you write up a narrative on this one, very similar to what I would do or anybody else would do for potential expenditure. Circulate that to council. Get someone else to help support that. Get it out to staff for some due diligence, and we'll bring it back to the council for action and debate.
Thanks. Will do.
Awesome. Councilor Walker? Morin?
Pickleball is wildly popular, and I'm happy for East Auburn to get access to those, but all the middle-aged men out there, please be careful and stretch, because I have an endless list of peers, friends, and family that are going down to pickleball injuries, so be forewarned.
Going down. Well, we got that new natural cemetery. We're fine.
I would just want to report on the water and sewer trustees that we've got a new superintendent as of the beginning of this year. Sid Hazelton retired, and Mike Broadbent's, we promoted him up to superintendent, and he's just doing a phenomenal job. He's rising right up to the role, and we're very happy with what he's doing.
That's good. Very good.
The only thing I neglected in talking about the New Auburn Walk is it's called New Auburn Lost and Found. And really, I'm glad I found Jerry Dennison on that, because he knows what was lost in the fire. And it's incredible how many buildings, commercial buildings, residential buildings, and in fact, based on the 90th anniversary, Chief Roma talked about change in fire codes all across the country, because it involved 12 fire departments fighting fires for 6 hours, and I think 2,400 people were displaced. I mean, that's like 10% of the population of Auburn in 6 hours. So I think we'll learn a lot.
Councilor Gray? Mr. Manager?
Thank you, Mayor. Council, I'll be brief. Just Assistant City Manager and I were able to attend the Local Government Reimagined Conference in Burlington, Vermont. A couple of the key topic areas included government in an online world. How do we make programs, information, access to local government more available online, intergovernmental collaborations, public safety innovation, and zoning, removing zoning requirements that are limiting housing growth. So those were the topic areas. I think they did a great job. There was numerous municipalities across the country that were there presenting and attending the conference. I think both Brian and I both have several things to explore based on our attendance at this conference and what we could bring back to Auburn. So, thanks.
And one thing on my report too, school committee meets tomorrow night for budget. We've got a couple follow-ups too with counselors. If there's anything you need me to address within the school committee, please get it out to me, okay? Email's best, that way I can't forget it. So, but that meeting is tomorrow. We're on schedule. We should have the budget to review as we previously discussed from the school department. Okay, now moving on to Jill Eastman, Finance Director. In your packet, we have the finance report. Jill, is there anything you'd like to add in addition to your memorandum?
Nope. We're just 3/4 of the way through the fiscal year already. I can't believe it, but time flies. And things are looking good. I didn't see any red flags. Like I say, I'm very careful watching it, and if I see anything, I usually talk to the departments. So, but I think we're going to end up the year fine. If anybody has questions, I'd be glad to try to answer them for you.
No, I do. I noticed approximately $4 million that you've taken from, I believe, the reserves or fund balance and put into kind of some high yield CDs. Was that number capped? Is there any more that we can put into those CDs? And how long of a duration? What was the term on those? They're high interest
We have
rates.
we have an investment policy, which I cannot invest anything longer than 1 year.
Mm-hmm.
So I ladder my investments. So I have 3 months, 6 months, 9 months, and 1 year. And just to keep the cash flow going, because there are times in the year when we get a great influx of cash, which is at tax due dates. And then as we go through the summer, we have some high expenditures because we have all of our construction projects going on and so forth. So I talk to the people that I deal with. They watch the rates for me, and they know what, I've worked with them for 20 years now. They know our cycle, and so we have it set up so that when mine expire, they call, they send me the new stuff, and it depends on what's coming up, whether I keep investing or not. But so, right now I have 3 or 4 million in there in CDs, and they're not all they all have to be in separate banks because it's only $250,000 to each bank. So they make sure of that for me. And I don't like to put a lot out a year, but now that they have high rates at 3 months or 6 months, then I don't mind doing that. So, and then we just can reinvest it.
Yep. Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
The ones that are locked into the longer terms, the 12, 16, 18 months, if that's the term.
I have 12. That's
12?
the max.
Okay,
Yeah.
12.
Yeah.
Do they allow you to take the interest monthly out, or do they make you keep it in the account until term?
No, it's all credited to our account monthly. So I could draw it out if I need to.
Perfect. Thank you.
Yeah.
Just quick comment. I complimented you before based on getting good yield. I add to that based on the restrictions. I didn't realize we had a 1-year limit. So that's a really great yield, and
That came to being many years ago when we got in, when the person before me invested in some things they shouldn't have. So.
Bitcoin. Okay. Last question on this?
Yeah, so I had one. So could you just speak to, I remember before I was on the council, there was a previous council did something to the debt service at Norway Savings Bank Arena. Could you just speak to where we are with that? Is that absorbed by the general fund, that kind of?
We purchased the arena from George Schott about 5 years ago. We were leasing it, and it was on like a 20-year mortgage or a 30-year mortgage. So we were paying tons of interest up front. After, I think, about 5 years, we said we're gonna just borrow the money and pay him off, which we did, and that debt is in the general fund.
So, looking at the revenue that facility is currently bringing in, is it making enough money to pay the
debt service payment?
Yeah.
Not entirely, no.
How far off, do you know?
Well, they're only netting about $200,000 to $300,000 a year, and it was $7.5 million, I believe, that we borrowed. It was between 7 and 8. So it's $700,000 a year, pretty much, that we pay.
Okay, thank you.
And in the original, I'm sorry.
Oh, no, go.
Yeah, in just the original agreement, we couldn't move to purchase until 5 years.
Right.
So once that opportunity came, that's when it came back.
So this is something I kind of forgot during communications, and very similar to Councilor Staples' comments about how are we generating revenue from these entities, but also about potential policies or ordinances or expenditures for the council to talk about. There is something I've talked about with city staff several times, and basically we'll roll this out, hopefully, if it passes muster, but a way to create an enterprise fund that is funded through a fee, a per night fee at our local hotels. And this is very, very common throughout the country. So $2 per night at 1.5%. That money, in rough math, based upon a number of rooms and the occupancy, is $130,000 at that level. $2 at 1.5%. $130,000 to $200,000 a year that could go into the fund to help offset the events that drive the hotel usage at the ice arena. New Year's Eve Auburn, the Lobster Festival, and so forth, and allow us to actually promote our downtown and athletic programs in a better way. Think it could work. Obviously, we're not going to debate it. There's a lot of blanks, but I wanted to make sure you understood that we're looking at, and we've tested now for 5 years, the effectiveness of having and investing in our ice arena, our sports tourism industries, our recreational industries, and we know we generate results. We know we generate a significantly positive economic footprint, and what we're asking for is now that we can help subsidize that positive, that add-on. So we'll get to that, but I think Councilor Staples, thanks for kind of reminding me, because that deficit is something I think can help be offset through this fund.
Cool. Happy to work with you on that if you need.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
Just adding one more thought to that. I always thought we missed an opportunity with the ice arena on the infrastructure, and it would have cost a lot more, which people were afraid to spend. But if we had spent money on systems that would have made the electricity costs less impactful, geothermal or something, or solar, and that may still be an opportunity in CIP. I don't know if that's been discussed by staff, but I just want to throw that out there.
We do have a solar, no, it's
renewable energy.
Yeah, the hydropower, and we get credits for it, and a lot of it does go to the arena now, since we started doing that, so.
Okay, very good. I'm glad we kind of had that little conversation. We're going to move on. I'm going to entertain a motion to accept and place on file the March 2023 monthly finance report. Do I have a motion?
Second.
Motion from Councilor Whiting, second from Councilor Milks. All those in favor? Okay, passes 7-0. Folks, we have 2 executive sessions on tonight's agenda. We have no further public action, I believe, on either one of those. So we will adjourn directly from executive session. I'd like to thank everybody who showed up tonight. It was a great meeting. Now, we have a labor contract negotiation in accordance with 1 MRSA 405. Do I have a motion?
So moved.
A motion from Councilor Staples, second from Councilor Morin. Yeah. All those in favor? Opposed? We are now in executive session by vote of 6-0.